Claire had a ranking system for places where it was acceptable to cry. Hospital break rooms ranked low because someone always walked in for creamer or a plastic fork at the worst possible moment. Supply closets were better, though the smell of antiseptic and cardboard made the whole thing feel staged and pathetic. The parking garage was almost ideal. Dark corners, concrete pillars, enough echo to make a person feel dramatic without anyone having to witness it. Her car was better than all of them. The car had doors that locked. The car had a radio. The car let her turn the volume high enough to cover the ugly parts, the sniffling and the sharp little breaths that came when her nose clogged and she could not cry quietly anymore. At 11 o'clock on a Thursday night, sitting in the driver's seat with her scrubs under her coat and a 12-hour shift waiting for her at St. Agnes, Claire Whitmore decided the car deserved first place. She was supposed to be happy. In the back seat, strapped in with more care than some patients received, sat Mike's birthday present. A full-size Yoda statue. Life-size, according to the listing, although Claire had spent enough time wrestling it into the car to believe Yoda's species had been denser than advertised. Mike loved Star Wars with a pure, unashamed intensity Claire had always found charming. Some people grew out of childhood obsessions. Mike had simply absorbed his into adulthood. Jedi lore, lightsabers, original trilogy debates, the whole thing. He did not perform enthusiasm. He lived there. So Claire had driven 4 hours to get the statue. Technically, she had driven 6. The first listing had promised a full-size Yoda and produced, when she arrived, a full-size Gollum crouched in a stranger's garage with one hand out and a terrible shine in its eyes. Claire had stood in that driveway at nearly midnight, staring at it, fighting the kind of despair that had nothing to do with Middle-earth. Then she had found another seller 45 minutes away, driven there half out of spite, and come home close to 1 in the morning with the correct small green passenger buckled into her back seat. It had been ridiculous. It had also been perfect. Before leaving for work, she had texted Mike. "Big day tomorrow. How do you want to celebrate? I have a huge surprise for you. Kisses." She was stopped at a red light when her phone pinged. Claire picked it up from the passenger seat, expecting a joke, maybe a guess about the gift, maybe one of his badly chosen memes. Instead, she read, "I think we need to take a break. I don't think this is working anymore. It's not your fault." She read it once. Then again. Then a third time, because apparently pain required confirmation. Behind her, someone honked. The light had changed. Claire threw the phone back onto the seat and drove on, her mind already trying to build an explanation out of scraps. Maybe there had been a misunderstanding. Maybe he was tired. Maybe he had meant to send it later after a conversation that made sense. Maybe this was not a breakup. People did not break up by text at 11 o'clock at night when their girlfriend had a shift and a Yoda in the back seat. They had gone to dinner the night before. That was the part her brain kept returning to, as if the fact itself could save her. Dinner had been normal. Good, even. He had kissed her outside the restaurant and complained about turning 30 like it was a funny tragedy. He had walked her to her car. He had said, "See you tomorrow," in a voice that had sounded like he meant it. "See you tomorrow." Then this. For a wild moment, Claire wondered if he had sent the message to the wrong person. That would explain the coldness of it. The awkward phrasing. The way it landed with no warning. Then she realized that possibility was worse. Wrong person meant there was someone else. Her vision blurred before she noticed she had started crying again. She swiped at her face with the heel of her hand, which helped not at all because her hand was already wet. The road past the reservoir was black and empty. Usually, Claire liked that stretch. No stoplights. No traffic. Just trees, water somewhere beyond the guardrail, and enough quiet to let her shift from regular human being into night shift nurse. Tonight the quiet turned mean. It left too much room for the sentence on her phone. "I don't think this is working anymore." A year. A whole year. She did not see the man in the road. There was only a sound. Not the hard crack of a pothole. Not gravel. Something softer, heavier, wrong in a way her mind recognized half a second too late. The car jolted. Something struck the hood and rolled away. Claire slammed both feet onto the brake. The seatbelt snapped tight across her collarbone. The radio kept singing. For 1 second, she sat perfectly still. Later, that second would bother her more than almost anything else. Then she shoved the door open and ran. He lay on the asphalt on his side, one leg twisted beneath him at an angle no leg should hold. He wore running shorts and one shoe. The other shoe sat several feet away in the road, absurdly separate from him. He had dark hair, broad shoulders, and the long-limbed build of a man who must have been tall before the road folded him wrong. He was not moving. "Oh my God." Claire's voice came out thin and useless. "Oh my God. Oh God." She dropped to her knees beside him. Panic rose fast, but another part of her shoved through it. The trained part. The part that had spent 6 years learning what to do while everyone else fell apart. Assess him. Airway first. Open. Breathing. Fast. Shallow. But breathing. Pulse. There. Quick, but there. Blood. A scrape at his temple. Swelling already, darkening under the skin. No obvious bleeding anywhere else. Leg. Bad. Very bad. Hey. Her hands hovered uselessly above him, afraid to touch and afraid not to. "Can you hear me? Sir? Can you hear me?" No answer. "Call an ambulance." The instruction arrived with absolute clarity. It was the correct thing. The obvious thing. The thing she would have told any other person to do while standing beside a man unconscious in the road with a possible head injury and a likely fracture. Claire did not call an ambulance. The logic that took over was not good logic, but it was fast. She was a nurse. St. Agnes was not far. She knew the ER team. She knew how to get him through the doors and into the right hands. Waiting beside the reservoir for 20 minutes while his legs sat like that, while he stayed unconscious, while she stood alone in the dark with what she had done, felt impossible. So she decided to drive him herself. Later, she would revisit that choice again and again, turning it over like evidence. At the time, it felt less like a decision than a command her terrified brain had issued to keep her moving. Getting him into the car took strength she did not actually have. Adrenaline handled the rest. She pulled, braced, apologized to him even though he could not hear her, and somehow got a 6-foot-something unconscious stranger into the back seat beside Yoda. It was probably terrible for his spine. She knew that. She knew it while doing it. She made a silent bargain with the universe that she would feel guilty later if he stayed alive long enough for guilt to matter. Then she got behind the wheel and drove faster than she had ever driven in her life. "It's okay," she said, though she had no idea who she meant. Him. Herself. The Yoda statue watching from the back seat with ancient plastic judgment. "You're going to be okay. I'm a nurse. Honestly, if this had to happen, this is a pretty convenient situation. Medically speaking." He did not respond. That was probably merciful. No one should have had to respond to that sentence. St. Agnes at 11:40 looked calm from the outside, which was one of the lies hospitals told well. The emergency department doors glowed under fluorescent lights. Inside, Claire knew, there would be 3 families waiting too long, 2 nurses doing the work of 4, someone vomiting into a plastic basin, and at least one doctor pretending caffeine was a personality trait. She swung into the ambulance bay and parked badly enough to deserve a ticket, a lecture, or both. Then she ran inside. "Trauma," she called, breathless. "Unconscious male, possible head injury, possible fracture. I need a gurney." Those words worked like a switch. People moved. Within seconds, the calm front of the ER cracked open into motion. A gurney came out. 2 nurses followed. Someone called for Dr. Medina. Someone else asked about vitals. Claire kept talking because if she stopped, she might start confessing. Marisol from triage appeared near the bay doors, eyes widening when she saw Claire's car. "Claire? What happened?" Claire looked at the man being pulled from her back seat. She looked at the scrape on his temple, the wrong angle of his leg, the one lonely running shoe still somewhere out by the reservoir. Then she heard herself answer. "I found him." The lie came out clean and flat, already shaped before she had consciously chosen it. "On the reservoir road," she added. "I was driving in and found him like that." It was not completely false. She had found him. The car had found him first, but that part stayed behind her teeth. Okay, Marisol said, already moving because emergency medicine did not pause for moral details unless they affected treatment. Let's get him inside. They wheeled him through the doors. Claire stood in the ambulance bay with shaking hands, her car still running, Yoda still in the back seat, Mike's breakup text still waiting on the passenger seat. For one breath, she considered staying where she was. Then she followed them in. She wasn't he supposed to be in his room? She wasn't he his nurse Medina had assigned him to someone else, but nobody stopped her from standing in the doorway, and then near the chair by the window, and then, somewhere around noon the next day, from sitting in the chair right next to his bed. He had a tibia fracture, clean enough to set without surgery, a concussion that the CT scan said was concerning but not catastrophic, and a collection of scrapes that made him look considerably worse than he apparently was, medically speaking. No internal bleeding. No spinal damage, which was the piece of news that made Claire want to jump up and shout, quietly, inside her own skull, where no one could see how disproportionate the relief was. His name, according to the wallet another nurse had pulled from his running shorts, was Adrian Blackwood. She said it a few times, quietly, to the dark room, like saying a stranger's name enough times might explain the math of how he ended up belonging to her, briefly, by accident. He woke up at 12:14 p.m. Claire knew because she was watching the clock, because she had been watching everything: his chest rising, the monitor, the door, the clock for 3 hours, in the specific vigil of someone keeping watch over a thing they'd broken. His eyes opened. Found the ceiling. Found, eventually, her. They were blue, a very dark blue, the kind that looked almost black until the light caught it, an interesting contrast against the dark hair. He looked at her for a long moment with the unfocused, deeply confused expression of a man whose last clear memory was probably a streetlight, possibly a stride count, and definitely not a hospital room. "Hi," Claire said, standing up too fast, knocking the chair back an inch. "Hey. You're okay. You're in the hospital, you had an accident, you're going to be fine." "Who are you?" he said. His voice was rough, like it hadn't been used in a while, even though it had only been a matter of hours. Claire opened her mouth. Closed it. The truthful answer, "I'm the person who hit you with my car and then lied about it to my coworkers," did not, under any reasonable interpretation, qualify as a good thing to say to a man with a head injury. "I'm Claire," she said instead. "I found you. On the road." True. Technically. A sentence that would hold up, if pressed, in a court of extremely generous law. He considered this with the slow, careful focus of someone whose brain was currently operating at reduced bandwidth. "Good," he said finally. "Good? I had a really bad few seconds there," he said, "where I thought maybe I had amnesia. And you were my wife. Or something. That would be even a lot to wake up to." Claire stared at him. "You have a wife?" she asked, before she could stop herself, then immediately regretted it, because it was, strictly speaking, none of her business. Except that if he had someone, that was one more person who was eventually going to want to know exactly what had happened to him. "I don't think I do," he agreed, with the philosophical calm of a man on excellent painkillers. "I do remember that." Probably. Probably. "You're sure you're not my wife, though?" "I am extremely sure." "Shame," he said, and closed his eyes again, already half back under, already smiling slightly in a way that Claire would spend a great deal of time, in the coming days, trying very hard not to think about. "You seem like you'd have been a good one." He was asleep again before she could decide whether that sentence required a response. Claire sat back down in the chair, picked the blanket up off the floor where it had slid, and looked at Adrian Blackwood's sleeping, scraped up, completely unaware face for a long time. This, she thought, with the particular clarity of someone 3 hours into a lie, is going to be a problem. She had no idea, yet, exactly how right she was. She stayed in the chair until she fell asleep too. She was woken by a police officer, bored-looking, clipboard under one arm, the specific bureaucratic boredom of a man on his 4th report of the shift who wanted to know whether the patient in this room had regained consciousness. He had, she told him. The officer pulled out a small notebook and clicked his pen. "And you are?" "Claire Whitmore." "I found him. On the road. I'm a nurse here." The officer nodded, unbothered, writing something down. "Do you have a car?" "Yes," Claire said. Then, no. It came out wrong both times, half a second apart, and she watched the officer's pen pause. It hadn't occurred to her until that exact moment, not once, not driving to the hospital, not in the 3 hours she spent watching a monitor beep, that he might want to see the car. A car that she moved it to the employee lot without thinking. I was in a taxi when I found him, she said. Near the reservoir. The officer wrote that down too, carefully, in the unhurried handwriting of a man who had heard 1,000 versions of 1,000 stories and was professionally unmoved by all of them. All right. He pulled a card out of his breast pocket and held it out to her. Can you give him this when he wakes up? We'll need to talk to him. About the accident? About the hit and run, the officer said. We take those very seriously. She sat on the edge of her chair for the better part of half an hour after he left before it seemed like a reasonable time to slip out and go check on the state of her car. It was bad. Bad, bad, bad. A headlight, shattered. A dent along the bumper that did not require a medical degree to read as this car hit something, recently, at speed. She got in, drove home faster than was strictly legal for someone who had already hit one pedestrian that week, and put the car in the garage, where it would stay, she decided, indefinitely, possibly until she died. Inside, she paced. The kitchen, the hallway, back to the kitchen. She made coffee she had no intention of drinking. She paced some more. Mike was already more than enough to deal with. At some point she remembered she still needed her badge, left in the car, and went out to the garage to get it. The headlight greeted her first, still shattered, still incriminating, sitting there in the dim light like evidence she hadn't found a way to get rid of yet. And then, behind it, strapped into the back seat exactly where she left him, the Yoda. Full size, green, serenely unbothered by any of this, holding his little wooden cane and looking, in the dim light, faintly judgmental. Saved, will I be? She asked him, in her best attempt at the voice, mostly because there was no one else in the garage to ask. Yoda did not answer. She called a taxi and went back to the hospital. When she walked into the room, he was awake. He looked at her. Hey, she said. Hey, wife, who isn't my wife, he said, and let his head fall back against the pillow. How are you feeling? Better. What happened? You were in an accident. A pause, the kind she hadn't quite meant to leave. Do you remember anything? Not really. Just a car. What car? She asked, half a second too fast. He looked at her, really looked, careful, a focused look of someone whose head injury had apparently not affected his ability to notice when a question landed wrong. Don't know the color. Dark, I think. A beat. But I remember the plate. She felt the floor tilt, very slightly, under her chair. You probably don't remember it right, Claire said, fast, the words arriving before she fully built the sentence around them. Head injuries do that. Concussions, especially the brain fills in gaps, makes up details, it's a whole documented thing. You could be remembering a completely different car. A car from a movie. A car from a dream. He hadn't actually told her what he remembered. She realized this a half-second too late, the way she seemed to realize most things lately, a half-second after it was already a problem. He was looking at her with an expression she was starting to recognize, the one that meant he was paying very close attention while doing an excellent impression of a man who was not. Sure, he said. Could be a dream car. His eyes drifted past her, to the side table, and caught on something. What's that? She followed his gaze. The card. The officer's card, still sitting where she set it down, abandoned in her hurry to go look at her own headlight, like a piece of evidence she left for him personally. She picked it up before she could think better of it, which didn't actually solve anything, since he'd already seen it. It's a police officer's card. He came by while you were asleep. Said he wants to talk to you. About the accident. Adrian looked at the card in her hand for a long moment, with the unhurried, assessing patience of a man doing math he wasn't ready to share the answer to. I'll call him later, he said. Claire opened her mouth to ask why later, and what later meant, and whether later was a stalling tactic or a genuine intention, when the door opened and Dr. Medina walked in, chart in hand, already mid-round. He saw Claire and stopped. Claire. What are you doing here? Aren't you off shift? I found him, she said, which was, by now, less an explanation than a reflex. I feel a little responsible. Until I see him through it. Medina gave her a look that lasted perhaps 1 second too long to be entirely about medicine. Right, he said, in the tone of a man who had decided not to ask the follow-up question currently forming behind his eyes, and turned to Adrian instead. Good news is the leg will heal clean. You'll be in the cast for, I'd say 6 weeks, give or take. We'll know more once we see how the bone's setting. Everything else looks good. Mild concussion, should clear up in a week or 2. No driving, no heavy lifting, plenty of rest. He scribbled something on the chart, nodded at them both in the brisk, non-committal way of a man with 11 more rooms to get through before lunch, and left. The door clicked shut. I know it was you, by the way, Adrian said, conversationally, like he was commenting on the weather. What? No. It wasn't he. It wasn't he, she said again, with the kind of firmness that, even to her own ears, sounded exactly like someone lying. I remember someone crying, he said. Saying oh my god a lot. Twice, actually. Distinct cadence. He tilted his head against the pillow, watching her. Also, you're a genuinely terrible liar. I want you to know that. It's almost impressive how bad you are at it. How would you even know that, she said, about me lying? I'm a lawyer, he said. Reading people badly lying to me is, more or less, the entire job. Claire felt the floor tilt again, the same slow, sickening lean as before, like the whole building had developed a list to one side and only she could feel it. Are you going to turn me in? She asked. She hadn't planned to ask it that bluntly. It had just been sitting there, in her mind, and she decided it was better to ask directly than to keep pretending she didn't know what he was talking about. Adrian considered this with the same unhurried patience he seemed to bring to everything, like a man who had never once in his life felt the need to answer a question on someone else's timeline. Still thinking about it, he said. I'll do anything, Claire said, and meant it with the kind of total, slightly unhinged sincerity that only arrived after a week like the one she had. I'll come every day. I'll bring you whatever you want. Anything. Just not that. Anything, he repeated, slowly, and there was something in the way he said it, a faint curl at the corner of his mouth, a glint that was probably just the fluorescent lighting but did not feel like just the fluorescent lighting that made her regret the word almost immediately. Not anything, she said. I'm not running anyone else over if that's what you're about to ask. I have limits. But anything reasonable, I'll do. I've had a genuinely terrible week. This is the last thing on the list I needed. Noted, he said, entirely unbothered, like a man filing away a useful piece of information for later. I'll keep thinking. She was about to ask what, exactly, there was left to think about, when the door opened and the officer stepped back in, notebook already out, the unhurried energy of a man who had his coffee and was ready to get this report finished before lunch. Glad to see you're up, he said to Adrian. How are you feeling? Anything you can tell me? His eyes moved to Claire. I understand you're the one who found him. Mind sticking around for this? That's fine, Adrian said, before she could answer either way, and something about the speed of it, the way he answered for her, smoothly, like they'd already agreed on it, made her chest do something complicated. The officer clicked his pen. Walk me through what you remember. I was out running, Adrian said. Heard brakes, hard brakes, close, and then nothing. That's it. Lights out. Car color? Didn't he see it? Just the headlights, and then I was on the ground. A pause, unhurried, almost generous. Any other details? I'm afraid I'm coming up blank. The officer glanced at Claire, then back at Adrian, jotting something down without much apparent suspicion in the gesture. Anything else at all? Adrian looked at her, a long, level look that lasted exactly 1 beat too long to be accidental, before turning back to the officer. I don't remember very well, he said. Possibly from the head injury. Doctor said it could take a few days to come back, if it comes back at all. Maybe more will surface. The officer nodded, unbothered, and made a final note. A few more questions, nothing that required either of them to do much more than nod or shake their heads, and then he was thanking them both, tucking the notebook away, and letting himself out. The door clicked shut. Claire exhaled. It was only then that she realized she'd been holding her breath for more than half the conversation. I should head out, Claire said, gathering her bag off the floor. I need to sleep a little, my shift starts at midnight. Can I bring you anything? Adrian thought about it for a moment, with the unhurried seriousness of a man weighing a decision that actually mattered to him. Fried chicken, he said. There's a place called Cluck Norris over on Tremont. And donuts, but not just any donuts, from The Whole Truth, out in Somerville. Worth the trip. A pause. And a phone. Mine's probably in pieces somewhere on the side of a road. He looked at her, very levelly, on the word somewhere, and let the silence after it do the rest of the work. Okay, she said. She was almost at the door when it caught up to her. Sorry, she said, not turning around all the way. Don't worry about it, he said, easy, like it cost him nothing. I needed a break from things, anyway. She got home at 4. Fell asleep still dressed, on top of the covers, and woke up at 9 to her alarm going off somewhere underneath her own hip. She called an Uber to get the chicken. Another one for the donuts, all the way out in Somerville, where the driver got lost twice and Claire sat in the back seat doing the math on how much time she had before her shift started. The third Uber took her to a phone store on Boylston, fluorescent lit and nearly empty at that hour, with exactly one employee mid-20s, name tag that said Trevor, the specific energy of a man who saw in each customer a very big opportunity. What are we looking for tonight? He asked, falling into step beside her before she made it 3 feet past the door. A phone, she said, in the flat, conversation-ending tone she usually reserved for patients who wanted a second opinion on a diagnosis she'd already given them twice. It did not end the conversation. What kind of phone? Trevor asked, undeterred, hands already gesturing toward a wall of glowing rectangles like he was presenting them at a car dealership. Are we thinking sleek? Practical? Statement piece? Claire considered, briefly, just walking back out and telling Adrian the entire phone industry had closed for the night. The kind a lawyer would use, she said instead, because it was the only specification she actually had, and because she was too tired to invent anything more useful. Something shifted in Trevor's face, a flicker of genuine professional interest, the first real one all night. Ah, he said, with the satisfaction of a man who'd just been handed an actual puzzle to solve, and led her 2 steps down the wall to a phone in a matte black case, holding it up with both hands like he was introducing it at a formal occasion. This one. Trust me. I'll take it, Claire said, without looking at the price, without looking at the phone, without doing anything except handing over a card and silently calculating how many more minutes stood between her and the rest of this evening. A fourth Uber toward the hospital, finally never showed, cancelled on her with the cheerful indifference of an app that did not know or care that she had 2 bags of cooling takeout, a phone in a box, and a stolen window of time before her shift started. She clocked in 10 minutes late, changed in record time, and went straight to his room. Adrian looked up when she came in. Wife, not wife. A faint smile. You look like you survived something. You have no idea. You know, he said, settling back against the pillows, I think, in the end, I got lucky. Getting hit by you, specifically. She set the bags down on the rolling table without comment, because she did not, in that moment, have the energy to ask what that was supposed to mean. He opened the chicken first. Frowned. It's cold. I know it's cold, she said, sharper than she meant to, the whole evening arriving in her voice all at once. I had Ubers cancel on me tonight. Plural. I ran across half the city Cluck Norris, then Somerville for the donuts, then a phone store on Boylston, then back here on 4 hours of sleep before a 12-hour shift, and yes, I know I owe you, I am extremely aware that I owe you, but you could stand to be a little more understanding about the logistics. He considered this, chewing a slightly less cold piece, entirely unbothered by her tone. Why Ubers? He asked. Afraid you'll hit someone else? The car's not drivable, she said. Headlight's out. There's a dent. He nodded slowly, like this confirmed something he'd already suspected. I'll give you a number, he said. A place. Take it in tomorrow, tell them Adrian sent you, and don't ask questions. That's not. She stopped, started again. Is this a setup? No, he said. He didn't say anything else right away, just a faint shrug, like the rest of the explanation could wait, and then something shifted in his face, a flicker of amusement. Memory's still not all the way back, he said, and smiled at her again, the same easy, unhurried smile from before. Got a pen? She dug one out of her bag, the kind covered in faded logos for blood pressure medication, the kind nurses accumulated through some process no one fully understood, and handed it over. He wrote a number on the back of a discharge form, unhurried, in handwriting that managed to be both messy and confident at once. Text him, he said, holding it out to her. Don't call. Just say it's from me. Okay, she said, and took it, and left to start her actual shift, 12 hours stretching out in front of her like something she had to physically wade through. She was tired in the specific, structural way that went past tired and into something closer to a personality trait. At one point she genuinely considered locking herself in the supply closet to cry about the general shape of her life, Mike, the car, the lawyer she ran over, all of it, but talked herself out of it on the grounds that if she sat down anywhere quiet for longer than 90 seconds, she would simply fall asleep there, and someone would find her at 6 a.m. curled up next to a broom. She remembered around hour 4, no longer had a car. Which ruled out crying in it, too. By the time morning finally arrived, a man had thrown a half-eaten sandwich at her after a disagreement about his discharge paperwork, and another patient had invited her, with great sincerity, to take a look at something concerning happening on his lower back. She declined the second one with the same flat professional smile she gave the first. She clocked out, and went to see him before she went home, mostly because she still had his food. Wife, not wife. Adrian looked her over, head to foot, with the assessing calm of a man reading a chart. You look exhausted. And you've got food on you. She glanced down. A faint orange smear of something, mustard probably, along one sleeve. Don't ask, she said, setting the bag down. I'm off today. So if you want anything. Phone, he said, holding his hand out instead of answering. She gave it to him, too tired to ask why, and watched him tap at the screen for a few seconds with the focus of someone doing something he found mildly entertaining. Done, he said, handing it back. Now you've got my number. She looked. He saved himself under husband, not husband. She got home and slept the kind of sleep that would have survived a direct asteroid impact. An earthquake, possibly. A small, localized zombie apocalypse and the full aftermath. She woke up at 4 in the afternoon, made coffee, and texted the number from the discharge form. Hi. Got this number from Adrian. My car needs some repairs. By the time she worked through the small mountain of dishes that had been accumulating in her sink since approximately the start of the year, a reply came back, a location, and 2 words. 1 hour. She drove out with the headlight still dangling, found the address, and stared at what looked, very convincingly, like a closed garage. No lights. No sign. A roll-down door with rust along the bottom edge that suggested it hadn't moved in years. The place was in a part of the city she never had a reason to visit. Now, she had even more reason not to mention to anyone. She was halfway through typing "I think I'm at the wrong place" when the door rattled and rolled up, and an old man waved her in without a word. He was shorter than she expected, built like someone who spent 40 years lifting things he shouldn't have. He wore an oil-stained work overall that had probably accumulated contributions from multiple cars over multiple years. White hair tied back in a ponytail completed the picture. What's wrong with it, he said, once she parked, not so much a question as a formality. The headlight needs replacing, she said. He looked at the headlight. Then he looked at her, a long, assessing look that made her distinctly aware of how unconvincing the headlight needs replacing sounded. Not because the headlight didn't need replacing, it clearly did, but because it was obvious the replacement was necessary due to an unofficial, high-speed encounter with something solid enough to cause considerable damage. She let him look. There wasn't much else to do. He circled the car slowly, running a hand along the dent in the bumper, crouching to check the angle of the frame, with the focused, silent attention of a doctor who already knew the diagnosis and was just confirming it for his own satisfaction. When he reached the back seat and peered through the window, she said, before he could ask. Adrian said no questions. The old man straightened up. I was going to ask about the Yoda, he said. But all right. It's a long story. Where Yoda appears, there usually are, he said, and wiped his hands on a rag that didn't look like it had cleaned anything in years. Tomorrow, around this time. Bring cash. I try to stay off the grid. Off the grid from what, exactly? From people asking me questions, he said, with a thin, dry almost smile, and that, apparently, was the end of the conversation. Claire nodded and let herself out, deciding there did not seem to be a version of this exchange where pressing further improved her situation in any way. She called an Uber out front, standing on the curb in a neighborhood that did not inspire a lot of confidence. She sat in the back seat for nearly the whole drive without saying anything, not really looking at the streets going by. It occurred to her, somewhere around the second red light, that she hadn't thought about Mike in almost 2 full days. Not once. Not the text. Not the dinner the night before that had apparently meant something different to each of them. Not the year, the coffee orders, the careful, practiced kindness of him. She turned this over for a while, mildly alarmed at herself. Apparently, she thought, the cure for heartbreak is running a stranger over with your car. It was, objectively, an insane thing to discover. She made a mental note that this was not, under any circumstances, a finding she would be sharing with any of her friends, not many, but enough to organize a formal intervention, or worse, to convene some kind of committee with the authority to have her hospitalized alongside the Yoda. And there was a second thought trailing right behind the first one, smaller, that she liked considerably less, because it was harder to file away as a joke. She was starting to think he was, and she made herself use the most clinical word available, the way she'd been trained to describe anything she didn't want to examine too closely, attractive. Not in the abstract, not in the way you'd note that a stranger had nice eyes and move on. Specifically, the hands. The eyes. The voice he used when he told her he was a lawyer, which was, she thought, its own kind of problem, because it was bad enough that she hit someone with her car, but that the person happened to also be a lawyer was the crowning achievement of a genuinely terrible week. She made herself look out the window instead, which felt, at the time, like the responsible thing to do. The Uber dropped her near a place to grab chicken properly hot this time, straight from the fryer, in a deliberate act of overcorrection, and a second one took her the rest of the way to the hospital. When she walked into the room, Adrian was on the phone, mid-sentence, in a voice she hadn't heard from him before, quicker, sharper, entirely focused, with none of the unhurried drift he used on her. No, take his deposition first, then file the motion after. A pause, listening. I don't care what opposing counsel says about the timeline, that's not our problem. Another pause. And the Hartley case, did they actually arrest the guy? He glanced up, saw her in the doorway, and held up one finger 1 second without losing the thread of the call. Okay. Good. That's good. A short laugh at something on the other end. Tell him I said yes, welcome. He hung up and dropped the phone onto the blanket like it weighed considerably more than it did. Sorry. Work. You're still working? From here? Cases don't pause for broken legs, he said, with the resigned, slightly proud tone of a man who found this fact both annoying and, on some level, flattering about himself. I brought chicken, Claire said, holding up the bag, mostly to change the subject before she had to think too hard about how competent he just sounded. His whole face changed. Knew it, he said. Knew you were wife material. Or, at minimum, someone who feels really, genuinely terrible about running me over. Don't push it. He grinned, unbothered, and reached for the bag, already pulling out a piece before she even sat down. Doctor says 2 more days, he added, around the first bite, and they're letting me out. And then what? And then, he said, with the slow, deliberate satisfaction of a man finally getting to the part he'd been looking forward to all along, we talk about what you owe me. 612-3456. Of course, Claire said. Anything I can do, I'll do. That's still on the table. She paused. Is there anything I can help you with right now? Adrian thought about it. Genuinely thought, the way he seemed to do everything without rushing it, like the answer would arrive when it was ready and not a second before. No, he said finally. Then I'm going home to sleep. I'm significantly behind on that. He smiled, but she noted that the smile had something faintly scheming around the edges of it. Get some rest, he said. See you tomorrow. She was in the Uber, 3 blocks from home, when her phone buzzed. On second thoughts, could you stop by my place and grab my laptop? I'll send you the address. She stared at this for a moment. Yeah, sure, she typed back, and looked out the window at the dark street, and accepted, quietly, that sleep was going to have to wait a little longer. The next message was an address not far from the reservoir, which she knew was a good part of the city, the kind where the buildings had doormen, concierge services, and apartments that opened directly from the lift. Expensive ones. After that, door has a code. I'll send it when you get there. She redirected the Uber. The building was exactly what she'd expected and slightly more than she'd prepared for: imposing, glass-fronted, with a lobby that had the kind of lighting that made everyone inside look worth double their actual value. There was a doorman at a desk near the entrance, who had, up until she pushed through the door, been doing an excellent impression of a man asleep with his eyes open under a magazine. He became very alert, very quickly. "Mississippi Miss, where are you going?" "I'm going up to Adrian S.," she said. "Blackwood. He sent me." "I don't think Mr. Blackwood is home." "I know he's not home," she said. "He's retained somewhere. He sent me to pick something up." She didn't particularly want to get into the details of how he was retained, specifically, with one leg elevated and a cast the size of a small country. A pause, in which the doorman appeared to weigh several things, and then he returned to his magazine with the slightly deflated air of someone who'd been denied an interesting situation. She texted Adrian when she got to the door. The code came back 30 seconds later. 123,456. She looked at this for a long moment. "Seriously?" she typed. "It's easy to remember. It's the first thing anyone tries when breaking into somewhere. If I forgot it, I'd be the first one who'd have to break in." She stared at her phone. This was the man who argued cases for a living. "You're a lawyer," she typed. "I know," he wrote back. "The irony isn't lost on me. Just go in." She punched in 123456 and let herself in. The apartment was not what she'd expected, and then somehow exactly what she'd expected, and then more than she'd expected in certain specific ways. Modern, all clean lines and dark surfaces, tones of black and gray that should have felt cold but instead felt deliberate, like someone had thought carefully about how they wanted to live and then committed to it. Almost impersonal, except for small details that weren't. The first door she tried was a bedroom, all black in there too, and above the bed, taking up most of the wall, a painting of a woman, rendered in gold on a dark background, the lines of her loose and confident and slightly startling at 11 in the evening when you'd been awake for too long. Claire backed out of that room. The second door was the kitchen, which had, unlike the rest of the apartment, the particular lived-in quality of a room that actually got used: a mug on the counter that hadn't made it to the dishwasher, a cookbook spine cracked to a page someone had been back to more than once. The third door was the study, and there, on the desk, was the laptop. "Got it," she texted. "Anything else?" A pause. "Some pants." She waited, on the grounds that this probably wasn't the full sentence. "And a shirt," he added. "And underwear." She stood in the middle of his study for a moment, contemplating the particular series of decisions that had led her to this specific point in her life, and then went to find his closet. It was immediately, deeply clear that Adrian Blackwood had a serious organizational problem, in the sense that he was better at it than any person had a right to be. The shirts were arranged by color, starting with white and moving through progressively bolder options, ending, at the far right, with a small collection of Hawaiian prints that felt like the punchline to an otherwise very controlled personality. Trousers the same. Everything in its place, ranked, sequenced, with a kind of forensic commitment to order. She thought about her own closet, which operated on a different principle: wherever something landed was where it lived now. She'd made peace with this years ago. Good thing he'd never see it, she decided, pulling a bag from the hook on the inside of the door. Or if he did, at least he'd understand why she'd hit him. People who were this organized set the bar too high. It was bound to produce consequences eventually. She found pants. She found a shirt that looked like one a lawyer would wear, which felt like the right call. She found underwear without making it weird, which she felt deserved some kind of credit that no one was going to give her. She looked at the closet one more time, then let herself out. Dropping these off on the way, she texted, and went back down past the doorman, who watched her go with the expression of a man filing away a piece of information for later. At the hospital, she handed over the bag, the laptop, and a look that she hoped communicated: "This is the last favor I am doing tonight," without her having to say it out loud. "I won't ask for anything else tonight," Adrian said, in the tone of a man who was not making a promise so much as a temporary scheduling decision. "I promise." "Good," she said. "You should get some sleep." "I'm working on it," she said, and called an Uber from the lobby. She was outside when her phone buzzed. "Also, there's dry cleaning. Place called Prestige on Marlowe, 2 streets from the hospital. Been there a week. Only if you pass by." She looked at this. Looked at the street. Looked at the time. On my way, she typed back. This was her own fault, she thought, in the Uber on the way there. All of it. Every single errand, every Uber, every piece of chicken. A direct and entirely predictable consequence of crying at the wheel. Lesson learned, don't cry while driving. Or, failing that, and she was realistic enough to know herself, at least don't hit anyone while doing it. She made it with 4 minutes to spare. She got home at 20 past midnight, put his dry cleaning on a chair, and was asleep before she fully decided to lie down. She woke up to a text. What do you say about some chicken? She looked at this for a moment, still horizontal, still mostly asleep, and then at the time, and then back at the text. Give me an hour, she typed. The garage was exactly where she left it, or rather, where she left her car, which was no longer in the same condition. If she was being honest, the car looked better than she left it. It had even been washed. It sat in the same spot, under the same flickering strip light, and it looked almost new. The headlight gleamed. The dent was gone. The bumper sat flush and unrepentant, as though nothing had ever happened to it, as though it had never met a runner on a dark road and the two of them had simply agreed to forget the whole thing. The old man named a number that was, by any measure, surprisingly modest for the quality of the result. She paid in cash, as requested, and did not ask questions, as agreed. She stopped at Cluck Norris on the way, picked up chicken that was still hot when she carried it into his room, and set it on the table with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had finally gotten the logistics right. Tomorrow, Adrian said, around the second piece. They're letting me out. Okay, she said. I'm going to need a ride home. Of course, she said, in the easy, reflexive way she apparently developed for agreeing to things where he was involved. The shift was better. Objectively, measurably, statistically better, fewer disasters, no flying food, no unsolicited requests to examine anyone's butt. She suspected this was mostly because she slept, but she was willing to accept the improvement without overanalyzing it. When she came off at 8 in the morning, she went straight to his floor. He was already dressed, sitting on the edge of the bed, waiting for the discharge paperwork with the contained impatience of a man who had not enjoyed being stationary. He managed everything except the shoe situation, which was, by structural necessity, one-sided, a single sneaker on his left foot. A vivid image of him lying in front of her car with only one shoe made the floor tilt again, briefly. The cast was visible, his trouser leg rolled up to the knee, and appeared to have been signed by at least 4 people. She looked carefully at one signature, the Dr. S, who drawn a small sad face next to his name. The crutch leaned against the wall beside him. I can get a wheelchair, Claire said. He looked at her. I still have one good leg, he said, and the way he said it, unhurried, like it was a perfectly ordinary sentence, made her feel, somehow, that it was carrying slightly more meaning than the words alone accounted for. Right, she said. She held back the smile until he turned to sign the last form. When everything was ready, she said. Ready? Yes, he said, taking a deep breath. Let us do this. It turned out he did need some help steadying himself, at least until he got the hang of the crutch. They were in the corridor, Adrian managing it with the focused determination of a man who refused to be slowed down by minor structural setbacks, when Claire saw him. Mike. Coming from the other end of the hall, fast, the way people walked when they'd been looking for something and had just found it. She turned instinctively, immediately putting herself and Adrian in the other direction, which would have been a perfectly good plan except that Adrian's crutch had a specific rhythm to it and that rhythm did not accommodate sudden pivots, and it was, in any case, already too late. Claire. Claire. She stopped. What are you doing here? I've been trying to reach you. Mike stopped a few feet away, slightly out of breath, with the look of a man who had rehearsed something and was now running it. I came to talk. I made a terrible mistake. Yes, she thought. Me too, as it happens. Mine is currently leaning on me. I want to talk, Mike said. I need you to hear me out. We don't have anything to talk about, she said. Look. He took a step forward. I love you. I got scared. That's all it was. I panicked and I. From somewhere slightly to her left, Adrian made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was adjacent to one. They both looked at him. Don't mind me, he said, with the expression of a man who was absolutely minding everything and found it extremely interesting. Please. Go on. Mike looked at him. Then at the crutch. Then at Claire, with a question he was clearly deciding not to ask. Don't make a scene, Claire said quietly, turning back to Mike. Not here. I'm not making a scene, I just want. You texted me, she said. On your birthday. I just don't think this is working anymore. It's not your fault. You couldn't even say it to my face. You waited until I already left and then you sent a text. She said it before she fully decided to, but it came out steady, which surprised her. We don't have anything to talk about. She turned. Mike stayed where he was. She walked Adrian to the lift, and then through the lobby, and then out to where the car was parked, and said nothing, and he said nothing, and the silence was remarkably comfortable given the circumstances. She opened the back door. Yoda looked out at them, serenely, from the back seat, as though he had been expecting this moment. Adrian looked at Yoda. Yoda looked at Adrian. Claire opened the passenger door, helped Adrian angle himself in with the cast, and went around to her side without comment. The Yoda, Adrian said, once she started the engine. Long story, she said. I have time. A pause. I have, in fact, nothing but time. She pulled out of the lot, and told him about the gift, the drive, the golem, the second listing, the one in the morning, the back seat, all of it, and he listened with the attentive silence of someone genuinely entertained, which was its own particular quality, different from being polite. For what it's worth, Adrian said, somewhere between the golem and the second listing, don't feel too bad about him. She glanced over. Classic pattern, he said, with the easy authority of someone who had seen this argument from multiple sides of a courtroom. He had an ex, or something else going on, needed space, panicked, sent the text. Now whatever it was has resolved itself and he asked back. We've all done it. You've done that? I didn't say that, he said. I said we've all done it. It's a collective statement. Mostly applicable to people who were 18 at the time, but that's beside the point. Damn. Very lawyerly of you, she said. The not your fault is the tell, by the way, he added. Nobody who actually thinks it's not your fault says it that fast. It's a preemptive defense. First thing they teach you, if you're already explaining, you're already losing. Claire drove in silence for a moment, absorbing this. Do you do that in court? She asked. Just read people out loud like that? Only when I find it useful, he said, and looked out the window, and said nothing else about it. They were pulling up to his building when he said, in the tone of a man who had thought this through. I think you should come up. I don't trust the crutch to get me to the third floor. But you have an elevator, she said, and immediately regretted it when she saw his expression, the one that meant his memory of a certain road at a certain time of night might be experiencing a gradual recovery. I'm newly disabled, he said. This is my first time. He said it with such complete sincerity that she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Clearly not cry. She knew where crying had gotten her. She parked the car. The doorman watched them cross the lobby with an expression that suggested he had revised his filing about her into a more complicated category. The lift opened directly into Adrian's floor, and she punched in the code. Now I have to change it, he said, as she opened the door. Then, after a brief pause, entirely relaxed, probably just at a 7. She actually laughed at that. All things considered, she at least hit someone with a sense of humor. Which was fortunate, because someone with less of one would have handed her over to the police in the first second. She helped him navigate the crutch over the threshold and into the apartment, which looked different in daylight, less deliberate, somehow, more like somewhere a person actually lived. He made it to the couch without incident, lowered himself onto it with the focused economy of a man rationing his dignity, and looked up at her. I was going to invite you for wine, he said. What? I was going to invite you for wine, he repeated. But then I remembered you've already hit someone. Let us not tempt fate. She looked at him. He looked back at her, with the particular patience of a man who had learned that silence was a better argument than most words. I should go home, she said. Sleep. You've been saying that for 3 days. And I've been right every time. He considered this, and then did the thing she was starting to recognize as his version of accepting a point, a small, unhurried nod, nothing conceited in the face, just the nod. "Text me if you need anything," she said, and let herself out. She sat in the car for a moment before starting at Yoda, watching her from the back seat with his usual serenity, and decided she was absolutely not going to think about the way he said wine like it was a perfectly reasonable sentence in a perfectly ordinary situation. She drove home. She slept. Adrian Blackwood had been running for 6 years, and in those 6 years he had established, with some discipline, one non-negotiable rule about the practice: it happened in the evening. Not because he was a night person, particularly, but because the evenings were the only time he reliably existed outside his own head. The office had a gravity to it: cases, briefs, depositions, the particular weight of other people's problems stacked in folders, and the only reliable way to leave was to physically leave, shoes on, door shut, gone. By 9 or 10, after a full day plus, he was ready to run. That particular Friday he'd taken his usual route through the park, then along the Reservoir Road, which was the turning point. He crossed to the other side there and headed back. He was at the crossing, checking his pace, when he saw the headlights. They were moving fast, and they were not slowing down, and for exactly 1 second he thought, with the calm detachment of a man whose brain had decided there was no productive response available, "This is it." And then he was on the ground, and then he was not. He'd woken up in a hospital room with a woman asleep in the chair beside his bed. Dark circles. Scrubs. Hair escaping whatever she pinned it with, and striking features that, when she opened her eyes, a hazel green he hadn't expected made the whole combination considerably more than the sum of its parts. She was, objectively and without much deliberation, exactly his type. Not that he was the kind of person who had a type, mostly because having a type implied a level of attention to the subject that his schedule didn't strictly permit. Women, in his experience, did not last long in proximity to the way he lived. Not because of anything dramatic, no great fights, no particular failures, just the slow arithmetic of availability. He was the 3rd year running of telling himself he'd slow down. The 1st year it was supposed to happen when he opened his own practice. The 2nd year, when he finished the Kellerman case, which had run 18 months and taken up approximately 90% of his available consciousness. The 3rd year he hadn't even bothered to specify a trigger. Just soon. Sometime. Eventually. Apparently, Destiny had taken a more active interest in the situation. He'd known she was lying within about 30 seconds of being awake. The "I found you" was too quick, too flat, the specific speed of a sentence someone had decided on before they were asked. He was a lawyer. He spent his days inside other people's constructed narratives, finding the seams. Hers had several visible ones. She was scared. She was tired. She was doing her best. He'd made an educated guess, confirmed it to his own satisfaction, and then made a decision that he recognized, even at the time, was not strictly rational. He was going to let it go. More than that. He was going to enjoy it. He'd almost miscalculated with the wine. That one had come out a little less controlled than intended. She'd been standing in his apartment, holding his laptop, having just dealt with her impossibly broken ex and his Yoda-occupied back seat, and looking at her, standing there in his living room. He'd simply wanted her to stay. The sentence had made its way from his head to his mouth without much fuss. He did not usually say things before reviewing them. He'd been on the phone since 7, working through what his team had prepared: a motion that needed 2 small revisions and a brief that needed 1 large one. He couldn't even remember the last time he'd actually used the television. 2 years, probably, but since he was home anyway, he thought, why not? It took him 5 minutes to find the remote, which was sitting on top of the TV as it turned out, and he found a news channel, made himself a coffee, and listened to what was happening in the world for the first time in what felt like several months. That was when his mother called. He let it ring twice, which he always did, on principle, and then picked up. "What are you doing?" his mother asked, in the specific tone she used when she already knew the answer and found it concerning. "Working." "You're always working. Some people have other interests, you know." "Just saying." "Such as?" "Personal lives." A pause. "What is that in the background? Is that a television? Are you home?" "Yes. Working from home today." And because this was so profoundly unlike him, his mother asked, "Why?" "I had a small incident," he said. "What kind of incident?" He looked at the cast. "Someone ran into me," he said. A pause on the other end, which he recognized as her choosing between 3 different responses. Are you all right? Leg. It heel. I'm fine. Adrian. The way she said his name had its own grammar, fully punctuated. You work too much. You push yourself too hard and you don't. How are the orchids? He asked. She let him redirect, which meant she made her point and was satisfied. The orchids were excellent, as it happened. 3 of them had required a specific kind of bark, sourced from a specific place in the garden district. While there, she apparently run into the Delacroix family's gardener and they discussed the front garden and the various philosophical approaches to trimming hedges. He let it run. He was good at listening. So, she said eventually, with the precision of someone who had been building to something for a while. Have you met anyone? He looked at the cast again. Actually, he said. Yes. Oh? The temperature of the word changed completely. How did that happen? She ran into me, he said. A pause. You just said someone ran into you. I did. Another pause, longer. Adrian. It's a long story. I have time, she said, which was, word for word, what he said to Claire in the car, and which he chose not to find significant. He gave her the version without the specific details: accident, hospital, she is a nurse, yes I like her very much, yes I know, it's complicated, and his mother listened with the focused attention she applied to everything she considered important, which was most things. Take her somewhere, his mother said, when he finished. I have my leg in a cast, Mom. I can't really go anywhere. You could come here, she said, in a tone that was almost singing, which was a reliable sign she had something diabolical already mapped out. Actually, you could ask her to drive you. By car. That's not a pause. Mom, that's more than 20 hours of driving. I know, right? She said, barely containing something that might have been a laugh. I'll cook. We can spend some time together. I can't tell her she has to drive me to New Orleans because you want to cook. You don't have to tell her that, his mother said, with the patient logic of a woman who had navigated considerably more complex situations than this one. Tell you haven't been here in 4 months. Tell her you have a broken leg. Tell her she ran into you, which she did, and that practically speaking, she owes you. There are moments when it becomes entirely clear who you take after. That was one of those moments for Adrian. He was quiet, and his mother, who had raised him alone and knew every variation of his silences, waited. The thing was, this was not the right timing. He liked Claire more than was strictly convenient, and with a speed that he'd normally have been suspicious of in anyone else. But she'd just come out of something, and whatever she felt or didn't feel about the man from the hospital hallway, it wasn't entirely resolved yet. He knew this the way he knew most things about people, not because he'd been told, but because he'd been paying attention. He needed a reason to spend time with her that wasn't I'm a lawyer who recognized you were lying but found you interesting, so I didn't press charges. That was not, by any objective measure, a good opening position. You know what, he said slowly, I think I'll come visit. Wonderful, his mother said, in the tone of a woman who had been expecting this conclusion since approximately the second sentence of the conversation. When? Soon, he said. I just need to arrange a ride. She woke up at 9, which felt almost indecent. She made coffee the real kind, in a pot, not the emergency single-cup version she resorted to on shift days, and sat down at the kitchen table with the full intention of being a normal person for at least 15 minutes before she opened her phone. She had a message from Adrian. She could see that from the lock screen, but she decided, on principle, that whatever he wanted could wait until she had at least one sip. Whatever it was, it would require functioning brain cells, and those required caffeine, and that was just biology. She took a slow, deliberate sip. Then she opened it. This isn't working. Not your fault. She stared at this. Then she scrolled down, because there was more. I need you to drive me to my mom's. She put the cup down. She said, to the kitchen, to the morning, to nobody in particular, the specific sound of a woman who had thought she was done being surprised by men for at least the remainder of the week. These men. She called him. He picked up on the second ring, bright and alert, in the cheerful tone of someone who had been awake for at least 2 hours and found this entirely reasonable. Good morning, wife, not wife of mine. I nearly choked on my coffee when I read that, she said. A beat. Did you actually choke? Yes. Are you okay? I survived. No thanks to you. Yeah, he said, and she could hear the smile in it, which was not helping. I know. Thought it would be a nice touch. Besides, if we can't laugh at something like that, what's the point? I can think of several points, she said. Where and when do you need me to take you? She had decided, somewhere between reading the message and dialing his number, that she was not going to engage with the "this isn't working, not your fault" portion of the message. It had been a joke. She understood it was a joke. She was going to behave like an adult person who understood jokes and not, under any circumstances, think about why it had landed somewhere between funny and not funny in a way she couldn't entirely explain. We could even leave today, he said. If you're free. The thing is. Where's your mother? She asked. New Orleans. She paused. Okay, she said. I'll look for a flight. A pause. About that. Doctor said I should avoid flying, actually. Pressure changes and the leg, apparently. Adrian. And I've already had one medical event this week. I don't want to push my luck. She calculated, without wanting to, because her brain did this sometimes against her explicit wishes, Boston to New Orleans. Roughly she was guessing, but she was a reasonable guesser. 19 hours. Maybe 20. How far is it? She asked, in the careful tone of someone who already suspected the answer. 22 hours, he said. Give or take. Give or take, she repeated. Driving time, obviously. You'd stop. Sleep. Adrian, I'd have to take leave. I can't drive you and return in 2 days. No, he agreed, with such immediate, cheerful agreement that she narrowed her eyes at the wall. Completely impossible. Right. I'd say you'd need about 2 weeks, realistically. To do it properly. 2 weeks, she said. That's my entire annual leave. Bummer, he said, with genuine sounding sympathy that she did not believe for 1 second. Then, as though this were a minor administrative detail to wrap up before moving on, let me know when we're leaving. He hung up. She held the phone at arm's length and looked at it for a moment, and then made the sound again, the AAAA, and stood up and walked in a small rapid circle in the kitchen, the way you do when you're too frustrated to be still but there's nowhere particular to go. Then she sat back down and picked up her coffee. She was a practical person. She had always been a practical person. When confronted with unexpected situations, she had a documented history of incorporating them into whatever plan was available and moving forward, which was, when you thought about it, basically what the last 10 days had been. Right. So. New Orleans. She had, in fact, never been to New Orleans. She had, in fact, always wanted to go. The food, the music, the architecture, all of it sitting on her mental list of eventually, someday, when things slowed down, alongside approximately 40 other destinations she had been slowly accumulating since college. If she drove him there, the drive and the return trip would account for 1 week. Which left a second week to actually be there, on the ground, in the city. This was, she allowed, not actually a bad deal. She'd been planning to spend her leave on the couch, recovering from Mike and the general character of the past month. New Orleans was, by most accounts, better than her couch. She spent the next hour and a half looking up things to do in New Orleans and writing them in a note on her phone in small, organized categories: food, music, neighborhoods, day trips, things that required reservations. She was thorough. She was always thorough about things she was pretending not to be excited about. Then she called the hospital. Her supervisor was, in the way that hospital supervisors were occasionally and briefly, perfectly accommodating. 2 weeks was fine. She had the days. Someone would cover. She sent Adrian a text. My leave is approved. We can leave tomorrow. 3 dots. Then. Perfect. Then you need to come over and help me pack a bag. What is the issue? Your hands are fine. Not sure, coming from you this seems like a threat of some kind. Anyway, I had a crouch for a hand. I need acetance. She looked at this. Fine, she wrote. We'll be at your place tonight. A pause. Good. You know what to bring, wifey not wifey. She made the sound for the third time that day. AAA put the phone face down on the table, and went to find her own suitcase, which was at the back of a closet she hadn't opened since last Christmas and which was going to require some excavation. Later, after she finished packing her own bag, she picked up the chicken and drove to his building. The doorman watched her all the way to the lift without a word. He didn't ask where she was going, and she felt, for reasons she couldn't entirely justify, like she was doing a walk of shame but in reverse. She punched in 1 2 3 4 5 6, let herself in, and found him on the couch exactly where she left him a day ago, laptop open, phone in one hand, looking like a man who had reorganized his entire working life around a 3-foot radius and found this mostly acceptable. "You brought chicken," he said, without looking up. "Because you told me to. I'm starting to like this arrangement of ours." He grinned, fully, from ear to ear. She set the bag on the kitchen counter. "I'm guessing once you get to your mom's, you won't be calling me for chicken anymore." "I wouldn't count on that." "Seriously?" He raised both hands slightly, the defense of a man who meant to be taken at face value. "I'm always serious." Then he got up, crutch first, and made it to the table with the focused economy she was starting to recognize as his version of not making a fuss. Smells good." "I thought we'd depack your bag first," she said. "Eat first." "Packing first means we can leave on time tomorrow." "Pleasure before work," he said, with the finality of a man who had decided the argument was over. "It's a philosophy." "Sit down." She sat down. There didn't seem to be much else to do when he said things in that tone, not demanding, exactly, just settled, like the outcome had been determined some time ago and he was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. They ate at the kitchen table, which suited the rest of the room perfectly. "So," Adrian said, in the tone of a man settling in. "Tell me something." "What?" "Anything. We're going to be in a car together for 22 hours. I'd like to know who I'm trusting with my life." "What would you like to know?" she said. "Ask me and I'll answer." Then, after a pause, "You've already seen the Yoda. I have no more secrets from you." He leaned back slightly, the way people did when they were comfortable and wanted you to know it. "How did you end up a nurse?" She glanced up. She considered not answering, then decided it wasn't actually a secret. "My dad was in and out of hospitals when I was a kid. I just spent a lot of time there. Started to understand it. Felt like somewhere I knew how to be." He nodded, in the way that meant he was filing it. "And the ER specifically?" "I like things that move fast. Not fast enough to break, apparently." She pointed her plastic fork at him. "That was going well until the last part." He smiled. "What about you?" she asked, because this was, apparently, the kind of conversation they were having now. "My mother," he said. "She raised me alone. When I was about 12 there was a situation. A landlord. Someone who thought that because she was by herself, with a kid, and couldn't afford to fight, she wouldn't He said this without weight, the way you said things you'd long since made peace with. I spent the next year reading every piece of paper I could find about tenant law. We won." She looked at him. "At 12. He nodded. His expression shifted slightly, as though this had pulled him somewhere into a part of his past that was in equal measure painful and something else, something he didn't have a clean word for, and didn't reach for one. She believed it completely. She also believed, without wanting to examine why, that this was the most honest thing he'd said to her since she hit him with her car, which had been, in its own way, fairly honest. "Is that why you're going to see her?" she asked. "I go when I can." A pause. "I don't go often enough." "She doesn't say so, but I know." The quiet that settled after this was different from the one before, warmer, slightly heavier, the kind that arrived when a conversation had gone somewhere neither person had quite planned for it to go. She noticed this. The familiarity of it, the two of them sitting side by side, eating. It felt almost normal. "Stop," she told herself, in the tone she usually reserved for impulse buying things at hospital vending machines at 3 in the morning. "Just stop." 9, she said, more abruptly than she intended. "We leave at 9. He looked at her, slightly surprised. 9 works, he said. "I'll have coffee ready." To avoid any further conversation, she occupied her mouth for the next few minutes by eating more than was strictly necessary. Perfectly reasonable excuse, too much in her mouth, couldn't he talk? Not because she wasn't ready to think about a man with even the smallest trace of feeling. Not because she didn't want to keep talking in case she got ideas. No. It wasn't that at all. He watched her with a mildly amused expression. When she finally finished, he stopped eating long before, and had simply been watching her with the patience of a man who found this genuinely entertaining. He picked up his crutch and said, "Right. Let us get to business." She went to the closet. He followed more slowly. It was the same as before, everything in its place, ordered with the calm conviction of someone who had decided, at some point, that chaos was a choice and had simply opted out. She pulled down a weekend bag from the top shelf and began packing in the specific way you packed for someone else, functional, neutral, no decisions made on their behalf that couldn't be undone. He stood in the doorway watching her like a superintendent, saying nothing. "Lawyer clothes or normal clothes?" she asked. "Normal," he said, from much closer than she realized he was. "One shoe or two?" A pause. "I have one functional foot," he said. "Use your judgment." She packed 2 pairs of shoes, flat and dark and clearly expensive, and zipped the bag. "Done," she said, setting it by the door. "See," he said. "Pleasure first, then business." 8 minutes. 7, she said. She collected the containers and brought them to the bin. He settled back on the couch, phone already in hand. She was pulling on her jacket when he said, in the casual tone he used for sentences that turned out to be less casual than they sounded, "I'm glad it's you." She turned around. "What?" "For the drive," he said, not looking up from his phone. "I'm glad it's you doing it. Could be been worse." She looked at him for a moment, the downward cast of his face, the phone, the absolute studied neutrality of his posture, and decided she was reading into it. He meant the driving. He meant it could be even a stranger, a car service, someone logistically worse. That was all. "Good night," she said. "Good night," he said. 9 o'clock. She let herself out. In the lift, she pressed the button for the ground floor and stood there for the 12 seconds it took to descend, and did not think about the way he said "I'm glad it's you" like it was a footnote, and how footnotes were where lawyers put the things that actually mattered. She did not think about this at all. She pulled up outside his building at 9:05, which she considered close enough to 9, and called him. "Ready?" "More or less." "You can come up if you want, I can manage the bag, but 2 coffees is one too many hands." There was a different doorman this morning. He held the door open for her without comment, and she experienced, briefly, the uncomplicated relief of a person who did not have to explain herself. Adrian was standing by the door when she got there, bag already by his feet, crutch under one arm, and 2 coffees on the kitchen counter behind him, with the specific placement of a man who had thought about the logistics. "I ordered them at 8:45, he said, reading her expression correctly. "Timing." She handed him his coffee, took hers, picked up the bag, and they made their way down. At the car, she opened the boot, lifted the bag in, and turned around to find him looking through the back window with the expression of a man confronting something he had not entirely prepared for. "Wait," he said, on a note that was both amused and faintly plaintive. "He's coming too?" "It seemed wrong," she said, "to leave him home while I visit New Orleans." Adrian looked at Yoda. Yoda looked at Adrian, serenely, from the back seat, as though this had always been the plan. "Fair," he said. He put the crutch in the boot, and made his way around to the passenger side with the particular focused hop of a man who had decided not to make a thing of it. She got in her side. "Ready?" she said. "Let us go," he said, and there was something in the way he said it, warm, uncomplicated, like a man who had been looking forward to this, that she filed away without deciding what to do with it. They made it, she estimated, approximately 9 minutes before he said, "What music do you have?" The car was already connected to her phone. She gestured at the screen. He scrolled. A second later, Whitney Houston filled the car at a volume that was not modest. He looked at the screen. He looked at her. He scrolled further, landed on something slower, sadder, the specific key of a ballad written for a particular kind of late-night crying, and then handed her phone back. "Okay," he said. "What is happening in here?" "What do you mean? What is it with the songs?" "All of them." She considered this. "Nothing. They're fine if you want to sit quietly with your feelings." Or, he said, pleasantly, if you want to drive your car into someone. Not funny. He said nothing, but she could hear the smile in the silence, and after another second she said, very flatly. Still not funny. Noted. I'm going to connect mine, he said, in the tone of a man making a public service announcement. Go ahead. I say this with respect. He connected his phone and changed the playlist to something more neutral, and they drove. The conversation found its own pace after that without either of them necessarily taking the lead. Music first, then actors, then food, then the specific territory of food I will and will not eat, which turned out to be a more contested area than either of them had expected. What did you eat before you started sending me to Cluck Norris? She asked. Other places. Name one. He named 3, and they argued pleasantly about 2 of them. Around the 4-hour mark, she spotted a diner off the highway, the kind with a hand-painted sign and a parking lot that was fuller than it had any right to be, which was, in her experience, the most reliable indicator of quality available. Here, she said. They got a table by the window. The menu was laminated and the laminate was peeling. She ordered something described as the spicy shrimp plate with the confidence of a person who trusted hand-painted signs on principle. Are you sure? Adrian said, looking at the asterisk next to it. Yes. He said nothing else, which she appreciated. What she did not appreciate, approximately 7 minutes into the spicy shrimp plate, was the heat, which arrived not all at once but in slow, building increments, the way a tide came in deceptively calm and then suddenly very much not. Adrian watched this happen with the expression of a man at a sporting event. Don't, she said. I'm not saying anything. You're making a face. I'm eating my lunch. He was, technically, eating his lunch. He was also, with the exact same motion, sliding his plate of fries approximately 4 inches closer to her side of the table, with complete studied neutrality, as if this were a coincidence. She took several fries. Thank you, she said, without looking at him. For more hours after that, the road had achieved the particular hypnotic monotony of long-distance driving, the mile markers, the same green signs, the same quality of light that stopped feeling like afternoon and started feeling like a general condition of the world. Let us call it a day, Adrian said, somewhere in hour 8 overall. My foot's gone numb. Just the one? Both, actually. But one I was expecting. She took the next exit. The motel sat just off the ramp, single story, recently repainted, with a pharmacy 2 doors down and a 24/7 convenience store across the lot that had, in the window, a rotating hot dog machine that had possibly been running since the building was constructed. It wasn't much. It also wasn't bad, which, at this point in the evening, was more than enough. She parked, stretched in the way that happened automatically after too many hours in a seat, and looked over at Adrian, who was already scanning the convenience store with the expression of a man making preliminary assessments. Inside the motel office, a guy behind the desk was watching something on his phone, something with dramatic string music and people shouting in what sounded like a kitchen, with the complete absorption of a man who had forgotten there was a world outside of it. Long hair, cap pulled low, head tilted at the screen. He looked up when they came in. Hey. What can I get you? 2 rooms, Claire said. He glanced at Adrian. At the crutch. Back at Claire. Then shrugged, pulled 2 keys from the board behind him, slid them across the counter, and returned to his drama before they made it back to the door. The rooms were next to each other, which was either convenient or something she was going to stop herself from thinking about. I'm going to have a bath, she said, key in hand. I'll go to the store. He nodded toward the 24/7 across the lot. I can come with you. I can manage. He was already turning. Then, over his shoulder, come outside in 30 minutes. She frowned. Why? You'll see, he said, and made his way across the parking lot with the crutch, looking, from behind, entirely too comfortable with being cryptic. She went inside, ran the bath, and spent approximately 25 of the 30 minutes wondering what, exactly, was happening in 30 minutes. He knocked exactly 30 minutes later. She opened the door, still slightly damp from the bath, and found him standing in the parking lot with a bottle of bourbon and the expression of a man who had made a decision he was satisfied with. Come on, he said. There was a terrace around the back, a small concrete slab with a few plastic chairs and tables. He chose the table that wobbled least of the empty ones. A single yellow bulb buzzed above them. Not much. Also, somehow, enough. Adrian set the bottle on the table, then hopped his way to the plastic cup dispenser mounted to the wall by the door, the kind meant for the communal water cooler, and pulled out 2 cups with the unhurried efficiency of a man who had already scouted the situation. I thought we'd need this, he said, pouring. Did you? It's a long drive. Morale is important. She took the cup. It was, for plastic at a roadside motel, surprisingly good bourbon. Neither of us strikes me as the bourbon at a roadside motel type, she said. Correct, he said. But then again, neither of us strikes me as the hit a man with your car and drive him across the country type, so. She clinked her cup against his. They sat for a moment in the particular quiet of an evening that was going somewhere, without either of them declaring where. We should play a game, he said. What game? You propose. She narrowed her eyes. If I propose, it'll be boring and responsible. And if I propose, he said, and the way he said it, low and unhurried, with his eyes on hers and not moving, made it entirely, absolutely clear what the dare would have been. It'll be truth or dare. Claire felt the heat rise in her face before she decided to let it. Never have I ever, she said, fast. The corner of his mouth moved. Accepted. He went first, without pausing. Never have I ever hit a man with my car. She gave him a flat look and drank. You're going to do that forever. Obviously. When her turn came, Claire thought for a moment and then decided to go with something real. Never have I ever lied to the police. After a beat, she drank. He raised an eyebrow. I told the officer who came to take your statement that I didn't have a car, she said. That counts. Technically, the entire conversation with the officer was more or less a lie, he said, smiling. Not necessarily. He never actually asked if I was the one who hit you. And if he had? Well, I guess I'd be drinking now for a different reason. But the car situation definitely counts. It does, he agreed. When his turn came, he said. Never have I ever had a panic attack on a plane. She drank. He watched her. Really? Once. Turbulence. I was convinced we were all going to die. I cried the entire flight and a man across the aisle offered me a napkin. Did it help? He was very kind about it. Adrian smiled. Never have I ever been aggressively organized about a closet while everything else was chaos. He drank and laughed. Fair. They continued through several more rounds, until she found herself smiling more, talking more, and laughing considerably more. So did he. Oh my God, I think I'm drunk, she thought. Then she realized she said it out loud, because he answered. No, you're not. Just more relaxed. He grinned at her from ear to ear. I think I am. I was sure I was just thinking that, not saying it. And you answered. Maybe I'm reading your mind, he said. I doubt that, she said, and looked at him more intently than she meant to. Truth be told, reality felt slightly stretched at the edges, more vivid somehow, which was probably why she looked at him the way she did. She realized the look was, in fact, entirely interpretable, when he leaned forward, elbows on the wobbling table, and said. Never have I ever wanted to kiss someone who hit me with their car. He drank, and looked at her. Her face, which she was perfectly aware of in that moment, went red. She picked up her cup and drank without thinking, mostly to give her mouth something to do so she wouldn't feel the need to comment. Then, noticing his reaction, he was just sitting there watching her drink. She looked at the cup and said. Wait, that's not. And the silence that followed had a specific weight to it. How did you know, she said, after a moment. That it was me. From the beginning. The way you said I found him too fast, too rehearsed. He turned his cup slowly on the table. And guilty people either disappear or hover. You hovered. That's terrifying. Thank you. He set his cup down, and something shifted in his expression, something quieter, more deliberate. I know the timing is bad, he said. I know you just came out of something. I'm not pretending otherwise. A pause. But I had to say it. Life's short. Someone recently reminded me of that by running me over. She laughed, despite herself, and the laugh came out softer than expected. He stood, crutch under his arm, and looked at her for a moment. I'm going to say this once, he said, voice low. And then I'm going to my room. Claire swallowed. If you want to come to my room tonight, if you want to sleep with me, or just sleep next to me, or anything in between, I'll be waiting. Door unlocked. Her breath caught. Adrian. I'm not drunk enough to pretend this is just the bourbon, he continued, calm as ever. I like you, Claire. More than I probably should, considering you put me in a cast. And I think you feel it too. So the offer's there. No pressure. No guilt. Just an open door. He pushed himself up with the crutch, moving carefully. Before he turned toward his room, he glanced back at her with that faint, dangerous half-smile. Don't overthink it. You've done enough of that already. Then he left, rounding the corner toward his room. Claire sat alone for a while, still thinking. The strange thing was that despite Mike, despite the whole bizarre situation, she genuinely wanted to go. Maybe that was exactly what she needed, wasn't it? On the other hand, she liked him too much for him to be a rebound. She felt lightheaded, but not so lightheaded that she'd convince herself she didn't want this right now. Not with him. She finished her cup and headed toward her room, decided she wasn't going to knock on his door. She was standing right in front of it when she realized she didn't have her key. Not in her right pocket. Not in her left. Not in the back pocket. She checked twice, in case the second attempt produced different results. It didn't. She remembered now, the key on the bathroom counter. She remembered too the exact moment the door had clicked shut behind her on the way out, a final, decisive click that should have registered as significant and had not, because the whole evening had been full of things that should have registered and hadn't. Something had seemed off when she left. But then again, the whole situation was odd, wasn't it? She stood in the corridor for a moment, staring at the door. Then she went to the reception office. There was a sign on the desk, handwritten, taped slightly crooked to the counter, out. For after-hours assistance call, 1-800. She did not have her phone. Her phone was in the room. With her key. She stood there for another moment, assessing her options, which were, none, and one. She went to Adrian's door and knocked. There was a pause. Then footsteps, the uneven rhythm of one good leg and a crutch. The door opened. He looked at her with an expression that was, very briefly, unmistakably happy. Then his eyes moved to her face, and he saw something there probably not what he'd been expecting, and the expression shifted into something that was trying very hard not to be what it had just been. You don't have the key, he said. Left it in the room. And nobody else at reception. I need your phone to call the guy. He leaned against the doorframe, and the expression on his face was the most genuinely, completely entertained she had ever seen him. Come in, he said. He meant it when he said he'd be waiting. Not in an expectant way. He wasn't the kind of man who confused an open door with a guarantee. He said it because it was true, and because he decided, somewhere around the second glass of bourbon, that the most useful thing he could do was be honest about it and let her make up her own mind without any additional pressure from him. She had enough of that already, in various forms, from various people. So he sat on the bed with his leg elevated and his phone, reading the same work email for the second time without any real expectation that his brain was processing it. He was just listening. To the door. To whatever sounds came from outside. When the knock came, he felt something that he recognized, even at the time, as disproportionate to the situation. He got up. Managed the crutch. Opened the door. She was there. That was the first thing he registered, that she was there, standing in the corridor at this hour, and for 1 second he just looked at her. Then he saw her hands. Empty. And her expression, not the expression he half expected, but something closer to resigned exasperation with herself. He put it together. He leaned against the doorframe, and felt the smile arrive before he decided to let it. You don't have the key, he said. Left it in the room. I need your phone to call the front desk. Come in, he said. The phone rang 7 times before the line connected, and in those 7 rings he sat on the edge of the bed and watched. We can manage, he said. Nobody else answering, but we could just not sleep. Watch something. She exhaled not quite a sigh, not quite agreement, and came and sat beside him on the bed. Not close, but beside, which was its own kind of information. The mattress was soft, and his weight had left its impression in it, and when she sat down the two of them conspired, mattress and gravity, to nudge her slightly toward him. She corrected it. He said nothing. The remote was on his side. He handed it to her without making it a thing. She started. Then, I would very much like to. But I think, given everything, we should wait. Sure, he said. Not disappointed, not pushing. Just sure. She looked at him sideways, like she was checking whether he meant it. He meant it. She hadn't taken the phone yet. And it seemed to him that the only way to show that things were settled, that they could spend the night in the same room without it being a problem, was to demonstrate it simply, without ceremony. So he reached across her for the phone, a natural reach, nothing performed about it, and she leaned toward him at the same moment, and for 1 second her face was very close. He looked at her mouth, and he was leaning in when the line finally connected and a bored voice said "Motel Pigeon" into the speaker. He sat back. She handled the call with impressive composure for someone whose face had just done what her face had just done. "Good night, wife not wife," he said, when she left. He slept fine. In the morning she knocked on his door with 2 coffees from the machine across the lot. He stood in the doorway for a second, looking at her hair pulled back, still slightly tired around the eyes, holding out a cup of probably terrible coffee like it was the most straightforward thing in the world. "Thank you," he said, and took the cup. "Whenever you're ready," she said. "We can go." They were on the road in 12 minutes. "What is the strangest case you've ever had?" she asked, somewhere around the 2nd hour. He thought about it. "Divorce," he said. "Couple in their 50s, married 22 years, the whole thing was completely civil until they got to the dogs." "The dogs?" "2 golden retrievers. Luna and Biscuit." He paused. Each spouse was convinced the dogs preferred them. The other party disputed this. "We spent 6 weeks establishing canine preference through behavioral observation, testimony from the dog walker, and one extremely uncomfortable afternoon where we brought both dogs to a neutral location and let them choose which lap to sit on." She turned to look at him. "That's not real. I have billing records." "Who won?" "Luna went to the wife. Biscuit went to the husband. It was, in the end, the most equitable outcome of any case I've ever handled." She laughed, fully, and he kept his eyes on the road ahead and said nothing for a while. "Just let it run." Their conversation continued the way it had been going for 2 days now, loose, easy, the kind that moved without anyone steering it, like 2 people who had known each other considerably longer than they actually had. They stopped for lunch in a small town that had 2 restaurants, ate at the one with the better parking, and were back on the road by 1. Traffic was light Saturday, the kind of Saturday that kept people at home and the miles passed easily. "GPS says there's a faster route," Claire said, around the time they were 30 kilometers from the next city. He looked at the suggested road on the screen. It was a thin line, the kind that suggested optimism on the part of whoever had drawn it. "That's not going to be faster," he said. "It says 40 minutes saved." "It says that now." "It'll change its mind." "It's a GPS, Adrian. It doesn't have a mind to change. It has never driven this road. Neither have you." He had no immediate response to this, which she took, correctly, as an opening, and tapped accept. The road narrowed within 3 minutes. Within 10 it was the kind of road that was technically paved but doing the minimum required by that definition. He said nothing. He was allowing her to arrive at the conclusion independently, which was, in his experience, the only way it stuck. "It's fine," she said, after a while. "Sure. The GPS wouldn't route us somewhere bad." "No." A thin column of steam rose from the hood. She glanced at it. "That's nothing." "That's something. Cars do that." "Not like that, they don't." The steam thickened. The engine produced a sound that was new and not encouraging. And then the car rolled to a stop with the quiet dignity of something that had made its decision and was not open to further discussion. They sat for a moment in the sudden silence. "I'll go check," Adrian said. Then he paused, turned toward her, with the tone of a man who had been saving this time I will be standing in front of the car. "Please don't run me over again." She made a sound that wasn't quite dignified and said something about it being too much, but he was already opening the door and getting the crutch under him and making his way to the front of the car, where he stood looking at the engine with the honest assessment of a man who had no idea what he was looking at but was going to look at it thoroughly anyway. He lifted the hood. Steam. Various components. Several things that were probably fine and one thing that was probably not. Well? Claire called from the window. I have absolutely no idea, he said. That's not helpful. I know. She got out. They both stood at the front of the car on a road that had not seen another vehicle in the last 20 minutes, looking at an engine that was not going to explain itself. Neither of them had signal. They spent the next 40 minutes walking slowly in opposite directions along the road, him with the crutch, which was not designed for uneven gravel shoulders, her at a pace calibrated to the fact that she kept glancing back to check on him, searching for one bar of anything. No car passed. They went back to the car. The emergency supplies were laughable, 3 ancient caramels and half a bottle of warm water. Adrian handed her the water without a word. They sat on the hood in silence as the sky slowly turned deep purple. After 20 frustrating minutes of zero signal, Claire slid off the hood. I'm going to try to get signal. Adrian raised an eyebrow. From where? We're in the middle of nowhere. She pointed to a tall, sturdy-looking tree about 30 feet off the road. If I climb up there, I might catch a bar or two. He looked at the tree, then at her, then at his cast. That's all we need for you to break your leg too. Then we'd be perfectly matched. Come on, I used to climb trees all the time. I've got this. She marched toward the tree. Adrian sighed and limped after her with his crutch. Fine. But if you fall and break something, I'm telling everyone it was your idea. He helped her reach the first branch, one hand steady on her waist. She grabbed the next one and pulled herself up. The higher she climbed, the better the view Adrian got, and it had nothing to do with phone signal. Claire kept talking the entire time, completely focused on her mission. I think I see one bar. Wait, no, it disappeared. Maybe if I go a little higher. Do you think we're close to any town? Because if we have to sleep here, I'm going to lose my mind. Although the stars are probably amazing. Do you ever just look up at the stars, or are you too busy being a fancy lawyer who? Adrian said, eyes locked on her. Thinks he knows everything? She paused, straddling a branch. Oh, wow. The view from here is amazing. You don't say, Adrian muttered, not even pretending to look at the tree anymore. Claire paused, looking down at him suspiciously. Are you even listening to me right now? Adrian Blackwood. He finally lifted his gaze to her face, the picture of innocence. Yes, wife not wife? You're staring at my ass, aren't you? There was a guilty pause. I'm providing essential safety support, he replied smoothly. Very important job. Requires complete concentration. Claire started laughing so hard she had to hold on to the branch tighter. You are the worst, she said. I'm trying to save us and you're just appreciating the view, he finished. It's a very nice view. She shook her head, grinning despite herself. I have half a bar, she announced triumphantly, waving her phone. I'm calling for a tow. Great, Adrian called up. Take your time. I'm in no rush. You're impossible. Half a bar turned out not to be enough to make a call, and after 15 frustrating minutes in the tree, with ants making increasingly confident advances up her legs, Claire decided to give up. She made her way down branch by branch, and when she reached the lowest one, she turned and used her hands to hold on while lowering her feet. Adrian reached up to help her, his hands at her waist. She found herself thinking that his hands were extraordinarily warm and large. It felt as though her waist had been made exactly for his palms. When she landed, she stepped away from him as quickly as possible, brushing off leaves and the last few ants. They went back to the hood, contemplating the road ahead, now wrapped in dark. We should sleep, Adrian said eventually. It's not even that late, Claire protested. It's late enough. And statistically, no one is coming to save us tonight. He gestured at the car, parked crookedly across the empty road like it had given up on life. Anyone approaching would have to swerve around us anyway. We'd hear them. Claire stared at the dark road, then at the back seat, then at him. Fine. He maneuvered himself into the back with some difficulty, stretching his cast across the seat as best he could. The crutch lay awkwardly across his lap. Yoda sat at the other end, watching everything with calm, judgmental wisdom. Claire stood outside for a moment, clearly calculating the limited space. Then she reached in, picked up Yoda with both hands like he was made of glass, and carried him around to the front seat. She placed him carefully behind the wheel, adjusting his little hands until he looked ready to drive them somewhere better. Making him the designated driver? Adrian asked. Someone has to be responsible tonight, she muttered, climbing in beside him. There wasn't much space. Not nearly enough. She tried to keep distance between them, folding her jacket into a sad little pillow and pressing it against the window. She shifted. Then shifted again. You can lean on me, Adrian said quietly. I want a bite. I'm fine, she replied, stubborn as ever. 5 minutes later, she was asleep with her head on his shoulder. Adrian went very still. He stayed awake for a long time, listening to her breathing, feeling the warmth of her against his side. She had run him over. Weren't you supposed to resent the people who put your life on pause and made you unable to move? And wasn't it strange to think that the greatest piece of luck in recent memory was being hit by a woman like her? What an interesting woman, he thought again. The words felt more insufficient every time. He heard the engine first. Then the flashing red and blue lights painted the trees around them. A police cruiser pulled up slowly behind their car and stopped. Adrian heard the doors open, followed by low voices. Think they're doing out here, one officer muttered. Sex? The other snorted. In a broken-down sedan? Bold. Footsteps approached. Flashlights swept across the car and then both beams froze on the front seat. Yoda. Sitting proudly at the wheel, hands positioned like he was driving 80 in a school zone. The silence that followed was magnificent. One of the officers actually took a step back. What the foo? Claire stirred against Adrian's shoulder. Wha? Adrian rolled down the window, calm as ever. Evening, officers. The first cop leaned down, flashlight moving between them and back to Yoda. Sir, is everything all right? Engine trouble. We've been here a few hours. Not our best day. The second officer shone his light on Yoda again, then back at Adrian. What's up with Yoda? Scared me to pieces. We're influencers, Adrian replied without missing a beat. Traveling around the country and posting pictures from different locations with Yoda. Huge fans. Claire made a small choking sound and buried her face in his shoulder to hide her laughter. The officers exchanged a long, exhausted look, the universal expression of men who had seen too much on this job. There's a town about 20 miles up the road, the first one finally said. We can give you a lift. You'll need a tow for the car in the morning. That would be great, Adrian said. Thank you. They ended up in the back of the police cruiser. Adrian's cast took up most of the space. Claire sat pressed against him, still clearly processing everything. After a few minutes of silence, he shifted slightly toward her. Not much, just enough. Next time we play, he said, I need to balance things out. I can drink too. This counts to lying to the police. She turned to look at him, eyes full of amusement. Influencers? Why not? She leaned toward him slightly when she answered, we don't really look like influencers. Lucky they didn't ask more questions. I think Yoda is self-explanatory, he replied, smiling. Plus bet you've never been in the back of a police car. No, she said. I haven't. Adrian smiled in the dark. Welcome to the club, wife. She elbowed him gently in the ribs, but she didn't move away. And for the first time since the car had died, neither of them felt particularly stressed about it. The police cruiser dropped them off at the edge of the town's South Main Street with their bags and a brief nod. They seemed genuinely relieved to have escaped the two influencers who took photos with Yoda. Claire and Adrian stood on the pavement for a moment, bags at their feet, looking at what the town had to offer. It was small. It was quiet. It was, crucially, still open in several places, the windows of a few shops and a restaurant casting warm rectangles of light onto the street. We should find somewhere before everything closes, Claire said. Agreed. They started walking, or rather, she walked and he made good time with the crutch, which was its own category of movement. The main street was the kind that had clearly been charming for several decades and had decided to stay that way. Painted shop fronts, window boxes, a general air of having no particular interest in the outside world's opinion. After 10 minutes they found a guest house set slightly back from the street, with white shutters and flower boxes that looked like they belonged in a postcard. A small sign by the door read, The Magnolia Inn. Inside, the owner Eleanor, she said, shaking both their hands with the efficiency of a woman who had been running this place for a long time and liked it, walked them through the available rooms. I have the main apartment upstairs, she said, gesturing with a pen. 2 bedrooms, one with 2 single beds, one with a double plus a private terrace on the roof. Very popular. Perfect for couples. She said this with a knowing smile. Then I have 2 rooms with double beds, and 2 single rooms that share a bathroom. The singles with their own bathroom are taken, I'm afraid. Adrian said the apartment at precisely the same moment Claire said a room. Eleanor looked between them, pen poised. Neither of them said anything. The apartment, Adrian said, after a beat. Then, as if explaining to Claire, it has a terrace. Claire said nothing, which Eleanor appeared to interpret as agreement, because she reached for a key. The apartment was, as advertised, charming, which Claire noted with the mild suspicion she applied to things that were going exactly as she had planned. 2 bedrooms. A small sitting area. And a door that opened onto a rooftop terrace, which neither of them went to check yet. They left their bags and came back down to ask Eleanor where they could eat at that hour. She pointed them to a place right on the main street, 3 minutes away. It was small, getting ready to close, but at their request they made 2 orders to go: a cheeseburger for her, a club sandwich for him, both with fries. Good thing we have a terrace, Adrian said, on the way back. When they got back, they also asked about a mechanic. Eleanor shook her head. The only garage in town is closed until Monday. Old Mr. Harlan doesn't answer his phone on weekends, says it's against his religion. She said this without any particular judgment, as though it were simply a feature of Mr. Harlan that one factored in. But I can give you the number of a towing company. They'll at least bring your car into town so it doesn't get towed by the county. They took the number and went up to the 2nd floor. When they stepped onto the rooftop terrace, the town lay spread out below them, strings of fairy lights in the distance, a cool breeze carrying the scent of magnolias. 2 sun loungers, a table, soft lighting, a small sofa. They sat at the table and started eating. Adrian watched her eat with quiet amusement. It was obvious she was very hungry. Halfway through her burger, Claire looked up and caught him staring. What? Nothing, he said, but the corner of his mouth twitched. You've got ketchup on your chin. She wiped it away. He reached across the table anyway and brushed the corner of her lip with his thumb. There, he said quietly. Perfect. The air between them shifted. She felt her pulse quicken. After they finished, Claire made the call to the towing company while Adrian sat on the small sofa with his leg elevated. The guy who answered was cheerfully unbothered by the hour and said they'd have the car in town by morning. When she hung up, they looked at each other. Last decision of the night, Claire said. Rooms. You take the double, Adrian said immediately. No, you can have it. Your leg needs the space. I'll be fine in one of the singles. No, your foot needs space. Besides, I saw the bed you have in your apartment. She stopped, realizing she said more than she meant to. Adrian's eyebrows rose slowly. A smile spread across his face. Go on, he said, clearly enjoying this. You saw my bed. And? Claire's cheeks burned. And it was bigger than mine. So you clearly have higher standards when it comes to beds. He said, leaning back with that half smile. Interesting observation. Claire stood up abruptly. I'm taking the single, she declared. End of discussion. You need room for the cast. Adrian didn't argue. He just watched her with warm, amused eyes. I'll take the first bath, if that's okay, she added. I feel like road dust and regret. Go ahead. I'll be out here for a while. 20 minutes later she emerged feeling considerably more human, skin warm from the hot water, hair wrapped in a towel, wearing the small white robe she found in the closet that smelled faintly of lavender. Adrian was nowhere to be seen inside. She went back to the terrace. And there he was, fast asleep on the outdoor sofa, one arm draped over his eyes, his cast propped on a cushion. In sleep he looked younger, softer, the sharp, controlled lawyer energy entirely gone. She should have gone back inside. Adrian, she whispered. He stirred but didn't wake. Adrian. His eyes opened slowly. For a second he looked disoriented, then his gaze found her standing there in the soft white robe, towel still on her head and steadied. Hey. His voice was rough with sleep. Finished already? Yeah. You can't sleep out here. He said nothing for a moment, just looked at her in the way he sometimes did, taking his time. You should go to bed, he said quietly. He didn't sound like he meant it. How's your leg? Hurts a little. I'll be fine in the morning. Let me help you. He got up slowly, crutch in one hand, and then carefully placed his other hand on her shoulder. She moved in close beside him, her hand against his chest to steady him. You smell like lavender, he said. I like lavender. Good. Let us get you to the room. When they reached his door, she let go, and for a second they stayed close, almost pressed together, neither of them moving. His hand rose and brushed her cheek, slow and deliberate. She closed her eyes without meaning to. When she opened them, he was looking at her so intently, so completely, that it took her a moment to find words. Good night, Adrian. Good night, wife not wife. He went into his room. She went into hers. He woke up to the smell of coffee. This was disorienting enough that she lay still for a moment, recalibrating. Then she remembered, the terrace, the robe, the hand on her cheek. The Magnolia Inn. The broken car. Sunday. She got up, found the small kitchen, and found Adrian at the counter with 2 cups already poured, looking unreasonably functional for a man with a cast and 1 shoe. So, he said, sliding a cup toward her. We have a day. What's here? She sat down across from him and looked at her phone. A carriage museum. What else? A guided tour of the historic post office. She scrolled. Something called the Butter Festival, but that's in September. He considered this. We could come back, she said, without looking up from her phone. A small silence. We could, he said, in the tone of a man who had decided to let that land where it wanted. She put the phone face down on the table, picked up her coffee, and said nothing. Carriage museum, he said, after a moment. Carriage museum, she agreed. And tonight, he said, I'll cook. She looked at him over the cup. You'll cook. I'll cook. At least do it at a decent hour, she said. In case it goes wrong, we should have time to find a restaurant. It won't go wrong. Famous last words. When does the carriage museum close? 5. Then we cook at 6. Plenty of backup time. When they came out of the inn, the car was already there, parked neatly in front, looking none the worse for its night on a gravel road. The tow truck driver was a man of few words and a firm handshake who accepted the cash, confirmed the garage would be open Monday morning, and left. They went to the small grocery store 3 streets over, which stocked what it liked and waited for the town to come around. He moved through it with the quiet focus of a man who had a plan: garlic, lemons, something wrapped in brown paper, herbs she didn't know the name of. What are you making? She asked. Secret. You'll see. She watched him choose an olive oil with the same deliberation he brought to everything and started to say, I didn't know you cooked. Although your kitchen seemed like. She stopped. He turned around slowly. So, he said, with the expression of a man watching something arrive right on schedule. You've seen my kitchen and my bed. Both of them were not what you expected. I was going to say it seemed like someone actually used it. That was clearly not all you were going to say. It was, she said, and picked up the bottle of wine she'd been looking at for the last 30 seconds with unwarranted concentration. They got the wine. Back at the inn his phone rang. He answered it on the terrace while she sat near enough to hear one side and far enough to pretend she wasn't listening. Hi, Mom. A pause. Fine. Car trouble, we're stuck until Monday. Another pause. Yes, she's here. Claire looked up. It's going, he paused, glancing at her briefly. I'm working on it. A longer pause, in which his mother said something he didn't repeat. No, Mom. Not yet. A shorter pause. I'll call you when we're back on the road. He hung up. Claire raised one eyebrow. She says hello, he said. She doesn't know who I am. She knows enough, he said, and went to unpack the groceries. They went to see the carriages and then the historic post office. The post office turned out, against all reasonable expectation, to be genuinely interesting. The history was presented by Dot, a woman who had been giving the same tour for 22 years and had opinions about every room in the building. By the end, they had opinions too. They walked back in the late afternoon light arguing pleasantly about the 1887 mail sorting room. Somewhere on the second block Claire realized she hadn't thought about the car, or Mike, or work, since she'd let herself into this trip. She considered herself a responsible person, one who thought things through, and overthought them when she shouldn't. And yet time with him had a different quality to it. Everything was natural, easy, flowing. She felt perfectly at ease beside him. She filed this away without deciding what to do with it. He cooked with the economy of someone who didn't need to think about it. Garlic in the pan at the right moment, herbs going in without deliberation, timing managed by some internal clock she didn't have access to. She noticed, from the counter, that he was wearing a t-shirt. He'd been in shirts the entire trip, collared, rolled at the sleeves, the lawyer version of casual. The t-shirt was different. It was just a t-shirt, and it fit the way things fit on people who didn't think about how things fit, which is to say, perfectly. "You know what you're doing," she said, mostly to give herself something to say. "I hope so." That's not reassuring. "It's honest. My mother cooked every night. Said it was the 1 hour of the day that was completely hers." He adjusted something in the pan. "I paid attention." They ate on the terrace with the wine open and the town quiet below and the fairy lights back on in the distance. The food was exactly as good as it had smelled. "This is really good," she said. "Thank you." She smiled into her glass. The evening settled around them, warm, unhurried, the kind that didn't require filling. She refilled both glasses and leaned back, and the conversation drifted the way it had been doing for days now. At some point they moved to the sofa. She wasn't sure exactly when, it had simply seemed like the natural direction. She realized, somewhere between the second and third glass, slightly drunk. She knew this because she was being funnier than usual, and because the part of her brain that normally ran constant commentary on everything had finally, mercifully, gone quiet. She'd been trying to shut it up for 16 days. Apparently wine was the solution. The blankets were folded over the back of the sofa. At some point the evening had cooled, and he reached behind her without breaking the conversation and pulled one loose and settled it over her carefully, unhurriedly, smoothing it at the edge without making it a thing. She turned her head. He was right there. Close, in the way the sofa had made inevitable over the course of the evening. Close enough that the gesture, the blanket, the hand near her shoulder hadn't required any particular reach. He looked at her. And she kissed him. It arrived before she decided it would, the way some things did ahead of the thought, in the half-second before her brain could produce its 17 reasons to reconsider. For a moment he went very still. And then he kissed her back, and it was slow, and warm, and more careful than she expected, the kind of careful that didn't come from indifference but from the opposite of it. His hand came up to her face, and she felt the exact moment he made a decision, because something in him pulled back by a fraction, not away, just held. He broke the kiss. Stayed close. She could feel him breathing. "Claire." His voice was low and not entirely steady. "Yes." He looked at her for a long moment, the specific look she decatalogued without meaning to, the one that saw more than it said, and she could see, clearly, what it was costing him to say what he said next. "I hope you feel exactly this way in the morning," he said. "That's all I'm going to say." She held his gaze. "Okay," she said quietly. He nodded. Leaned back against the cushion. Didn't he move away? Neither did she. The fairy lights below kept doing what they did, and the night stayed warm, and neither of them seemed in any particular hurry to go anywhere. She woke up in her own bed, which was fine, except that she had no memory of getting there. She lay still for a moment, running a quick inventory. Clothes. Blanket. The soft pillow. All accounted for. Outside the window, the town was just a little noisier than it had been over the weekend. Just a little. The last thing she remembered clearly was the terrace. The fairy lights. The sofa. His hand. She got up, changed her clothes, and followed the smell of coffee. He was in the kitchen, already dressed, 2 cups poured, looking out the small window at the street below with the expression of a man who had been up for a while. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning." She took the cup he slid toward her. "How did I get to my room?" He looked at her over his coffee. "You fell asleep on the sofa," he said. "Around midnight. I woke you up enough to walk." Right. She processed this. Thank you. You're welcome. A pause. I apparently have more self-control than I thought, he said, in the neutral tone of a man stating a fact he found mildly interesting. She looked at him. He looked back at her, entirely composed, and drank his coffee. She decided, for reasons of self-preservation, to also drink her coffee. He called the mechanic at 9. The mechanic, a man of few words and considerable certainty about timelines, said he'd send the tow truck to bring the car in, and they should come by in 2 hours. They walked to the garage 2 hours later, through a town that felt different in daylight, smaller, warmer, more itself. The car sat inside looking scrubbed and repaired. What happened? Adrian asked. Injectors, the mechanic said, which explained the steam and the sound and the particular way the engine had given up. They argued in front of him about who would pay. I should pay, Adrian said. We're going somewhere I decided on. It's my car, she said. The mechanic watched this for a few minutes, then said, there's a card reader here. I'll put the amount in. When you two decide who is paying, tap the card. He threw his oil-stained rag over his shoulder and walked off. In the end, she insisted firmly enough that he let her. They went back to the inn to collect their bags, and found Eleanor in the small sitting room with coffee and something that smelled like fresh pastry, which she appeared to have produced specifically to delay their departure. You can't leave without trying these, she said, in the tone of a woman for whom this was not a request. They tried them. They were excellent. Eleanor accepted this as her due. You'll come back, she said, when they finally stood at the door with their bags, in a way that made it sound less like a question and more like something she was confirming. We will, Adrian said. Then, with complete innocence, wasn't there a festival we needed to get to? Eleanor intervened enthusiastically. The Butter Festival. With absolute, total certainty, you must come. It's the biggest event of the year. He looked back at Claire with that expression, the one that said, see, I told you, and she decided not to comment further. She picked up both bags and made her way to the car, Adrian limping behind her. Eleanor watched them go with the satisfied expression of a woman who was very sure she would see them again. They were back on the road by 12:30, the town receding in the rearview mirror, the highway opening up ahead. Claire drove. Adrian had the window down slightly, his arm resting on the door, relaxed in the specific way of a man who had nowhere to be but where he was going. The GPS, she noticed, was showing only the main route. She didn't comment on this. He didn't either. They crossed into Alabama around 2, and the highway opened up the way highways did in the south, wider, flatter, with more sky than strictly necessary and a quality of afternoon light that felt like it came from a different sun than the one up north. Adrian was on his phone periodically, working, in the half-attentive way of a man who had learned to maintain 2 conversations simultaneously without either one noticing. Claire drove and tried very hard not to think about the kiss. She did this successfully for approximately 40 minutes. They stopped for gas outside Birmingham and kept going. The decision to push through was unspoken. They both looked at the map around the same time and arrived at the same calculation without discussing it. It was Mississippi that changed things. The road shifted somewhere after the state line, the interstate giving way to a suggestion from the GPS that turned out to be the Natchez Trace Parkway. No trucks, no billboards, 2 lanes through trees that had been there considerably longer than the road. The speed limit dropped to 50 and neither of them minded. This is nicer, Claire said. It is. The GPS found this? There's hope for it yet. She didn't comment on this. They stopped in Tupelo for dinner. It was, Adrian noted, the birthplace of Elvis Presley, a fact that was not possible to miss given the volume of signage the town had committed to on the subject. They ate at a place 3 streets from the main drag, the only one with no Elvis theming whatsoever, which felt like a deliberate editorial stance, and the food was excellent. On the way back to the car, they passed a small building with a hand-painted sign, white with gold lettering, Elvis-themed wedding ceremonies all hours inquire within. Adrian stopped. Claire kept walking for 2 steps before she realized he wasn't beside her. She turned around. He was looking at the sign with the expression of a man who had found something he intended to use. Thinking of making things official, he said. Wife not wife. What, she said. Too soon? He tilted his head. It would resolve the wife not wife situation very efficiently. Legally binding. One stop. Absolutely not. He looked at the sign for another moment. Fine, he said, turning back to the car. We don't need to rush. A pause. Las Vegas, then. She stared at him. That's worse. More options in Las Vegas. Different themes. I am not marrying you here or in Las Vegas. They were walking toward the car, him limping alongside her. He stopped again, grinning from ear to ear. Let the jury note, he said, that she did not refuse me outright. It's only about the location. She felt herself go red to the tips of her ears. Walk, she said. They walked, Adrian still grinning, and her feeling exactly as you should feel when you have a very good lawyer beside you. One who knew how to twist words. A very good lawyer, as it turned out. The town of Tupelo went about its business entirely unaware of how close it had come to being a plot point. Drive, he said, pleasantly, when they reached the car. She drove. They found a motel on the south side of town with clean rooms, a working ice machine, and absolutely no themed anything, which Claire selected partly on merit and partly on principle. 2 rooms again. He didn't say anything about it. He said nothing when she said good night and went into her room. Good night, wife not wife of mine, he said to the empty corridor. Then he went into his room. He left the door ajar. Just in case. Breakfast came with an Elvis impersonator. Not an intentional one, just the waiter at the diner next to the motel, who had the accent, the hair, and a delivery style that caused both of them, independently, to look up from the menu with the same expression. He took their order without incident and they sat in the particular silence of 2 people who had just survived the same small thing together. Don't, Adrian said. I wasn't going to say anything. You were. I wasn't. He looked at her. Thank you very much, she said, in the voice, and he laughed, and that was breakfast. They were back on the Natchez Trace by 8, the road doing what it did, quiet, trees, the occasional historical marker and the miles passing in the easy, unhurried way that the last several days had established as the default. Somewhere around the first hour, Adrian looked at his phone and typed something. Telling my mother we'll be there in about 3 hours, he said. Okay, she said. She drove, and thought about what 3 hours meant. And what came after that. Before the trip, she had a plan, simple, clean, something that had made sense when she requested the 2 weeks. Drive him there. Have a week in New Orleans for herself. The city had been on her list for years, and this was, whatever else it was, a reasonable excuse to finally go. He hadn't been in the plan. Not beyond the driving part. But then. She glanced at the backseat in the mirror. Yoda looked back at her from his usual position, serenely, as she thought about the Natchez Trace, the police car, never have I ever on a plastic terrace. A kiss, she started. Approximately 800 miles of American highway. She thought, New Orleans probably wouldn't be as good without him. This was a new thought. She turned it over a few times, checking it from different angles, waiting for the part of her brain that catalogued concerns to weigh in with its objections. It was quiet. She decided against every instinct she'd built up over 24 years of being exactly the kind of person who planned things and then stuck to the plan to let whatever was happening keep happening, and see where it went. This felt either very mature or very stupid. She hadn't determined which yet. His mother's house was in the Garden District, on a street where the trees were old and the houses sat back from the road behind tall iron gates. They stopped in front of one, and almost immediately the gates opened and they drove inside. The woman who came out to meet them in front of an imposing house set before a stone fountain was blonde, somewhere in her 60s, with the kind of posture that came from decades of knowing exactly who she was, and a smile that Claire recognized immediately because she'd seen it before, on a face that had been wearing it more often lately. She hugged Adrian first, briefly, the way mothers hugged sons who didn't visit enough, a whole conversation compressed into 4 seconds, and then turned to Claire with both hands out. I'm so glad you're here, she said, and meant it so completely that Claire felt, briefly, like she'd known this woman for years. I'm sorry I hit your son, Claire said. It came out before she'd planned it. She'd been carrying it since the driveway, and it had simply decided it was done waiting. Adrian made a sound. A short, genuine laugh, the kind that arrived before you could manage it. His mother looked at Claire for 1 second, and then she laughed too warm and full, the laugh of a woman who found people genuinely delightful when they earned it. You're lovely, she said. but I think he is happy about it. Claire looked at him. He was, in fact, smiling from ear to ear, and made no effort to pretend otherwise. Come, his mother said, and led them into a garden that was the kind that happened when someone had time, taste, and strong opinions about what belonged where. She named things as they walked: a rose that had survived 3 hurricanes, a jasmine that had not been asked permission before it took over the south wall, and by the time they reached the back of the property Claire had entirely forgotten to be nervous. The pool came into view first. Long, still, catching the afternoon light. Beyond it, a small white structure with dark shutters and a covered porch. Pool, she thought. You must be tired, his mother said. Adrian, I'd put you in the pool house as usual. She turned to Claire. And you'll have your choice of the guest rooms in the main house. Unless a pause, with the specific pause of a woman who had raised a son and could rent a room, you'd prefer to share? No, Claire said. A beat too fast, but clear. Of course, his mother said, entirely unruffled. I'll show you upstairs. The main house had wide porches on both floors, high ceilings, and the kind of quiet that accumulated in rooms cared for over a long time. Walking up to the guest room, his mother said, without particular emphasis, he bought this for me, you know. 2 years ago. A pause. He works too much. I tell him and he doesn't argue, which means I'm right. She smiled. But I'll say this, I haven't seen him look the way he looks today in a very long time. She showed Claire the room, tall windows, a view of the garden, and left her to settle in. They hadn't eaten since the Elvis breakfast, which made the arrival at the table shrimp, rice, something with okra that she hadn't expected to like and liked immediately feel like a significant event. This is extraordinary, Claire said. Thank you, his mother said. I enjoy cooking. Adrian told me. He said you cooked every night. I did. She looked at her son. So he cooked for you. It wasn't a question. Adrian picked up his glass. His mother smiled at Claire with the expression of a woman who had just confirmed something she suspected for a while, and said nothing more about it. She simply refilled their glasses. After dinner, she sent them into the garden. Show her the maze, she said. The garden was different at night, the jasmine stronger, the shapes softer, the distant hum of the city barely audible beyond the walls. Claire walked beside him on the stone path, her steps slow and matched to the rhythm of his crutch. At one point he said, "Move to my left side." She did, without fully understanding why. She thought maybe he was tired and was already preparing to suggest they turn back. But without announcing it, he reached for her hand as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Something inside her shifted. It was awkward, logistically. He did it anyway. She didn't say anything. She simply held on. They walked in silence for a while until they reached a tall green wall. He nodded toward an opening, and they stepped into the maze. After the first few turns, Claire lost all sense of direction, but Adrian moved with quiet certainty. When they finally emerged into the center, she saw a small circular clearing with a stone bench, a fire pit already prepared, and a large tree arching overhead. He let go of her hand, took a box of matches from his pocket, and handed it to her. "Light the fire," he said. She did. The flames caught quickly, dancing in the cool night air. They sat together on the bench, watching the fire, the stars bright above them. It was one of the most beautiful places she had ever seen, hidden, intimate, wrapped in green walls. She became aware that his arm had settled behind her on the back of the bench. He wasn't quite touching her, but he was close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, smell his skin and the faint trace of his cologne. They sat like that for a while in comfortable silence. Then he spoke. "Claire," he said. She turned to look at him. He looked like he was searching for words, which was unusual for a man who made his living with them, and that made it mean even more. She waited. "I'm extremely happy you're here with me," he said. And smiled at her, a simple, real smile. She looked at him for a moment, then shifted closer, leaning into him. His arm tightened around her shoulders. This feels so good, she thought. When she lifted her gaze partly to tell him exactly that he was already looking at her. There was something in his eyes, desire, affection, and something deeper she couldn't quite name. Then Adrian leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't move. He kissed her. It began gently, almost tentatively, like he had been thinking about it for a long time and saw no reason to rush now that the moment had arrived. His left hand came up to her face, gently lifting her chin. When she had kissed him before, it had been explosive, full of desperate want. This time she felt desire, but also a wish that this moment would never end. His lips were warm and sensual. When she responded, the kiss became more possessive, his mouth covering hers completely. She felt a powerful urge to press herself against him and did exactly that. His hand slid from her chin down to her shoulder and then pulled her even closer. She shifted, lifting one knee onto the bench, and they continued kissing passionately. What happened next was driven by pure, unfiltered passion. She began unbuttoning his shirt, he did the same with hers. When the fabric fell away, her hand came to rest on his chest, skin against skin. Then she straddled him, and his hands proved expert at unhooking her bra. The moment it slipped off and her breasts pressed against his chest, both of them let out a low moan. He held her tightly by the waist with one hand. His lips moved down her neck, kissing softly, then closed around one of her nipples. She couldn't remember the last time she had wanted someone this much, this man, this closeness, this intimacy. His mouth played with her breasts, then returned to her lips. She could feel how much he wanted her, just as badly as she wanted him. His hand tightened on her waist, pulling her even closer, and she felt his heartbeat thundering against her as his lips moved to her shoulder. He held her tightly, let out a deep breath, and whispered against her skin. "God, I've wanted this for so long." "Good," she said. "Me too." He held her completely, his arms wrapped around her, strong and warm. They stayed like that for a long moment in silence, heart to heart, breath to breath, neither wanting to let go. Then he spoke, his voice low against her ear. "We don't have to rush," he whispered. "I don't want to rush with you." After a pause, he added, almost reluctantly, "Actually, I want it very much. But I want you to be sure." She didn't answer with words. Instead, she kissed him again, deeper this time. His hands moved slowly over her back, caressing her skin, sending shivers through her with every touch. She wanted him. Desperately. But she also didn't want to rush. Not this. Not with him. He held her close, pressed against him, until their breathing gradually slowed. Her nose rested in the warm space between his neck and shoulder. His hands kept moving gently over her back, slow and tender, drawing quiet sparks across her skin. They stayed like that for a long time, skin to skin, hearts beating together, neither of them willing to let the other go. Her face was perfectly mirrored in his eyes. Neither of them wanted the moment to end. They walked back through the maze in silence. She stayed on his left side, her arm linked with his. The night air felt cooler now, but the warmth between them lingered. At the pool, under the soft glow of the garden lights, he stopped and pulled her gently toward him. He kissed her again, slow, deep, and full of everything they hadn't said. For a moment she thought he might whisper, "Let us go inside," and part of her wanted him to. But he didn't. Instead, he rested his forehead against hers for a second, then let her go. "Good night, wife not wife," he said softly. "Sleep well." She smiled, a little lost. "Good night," she whispered. "Sleep well." She watched him disappear toward his room, then turned and walked to hers. The entire house was quiet, and still his mother had probably gone to bed long ago. She closed the door behind her, leaned back against it, and let out a long, shaky breath. That was amazing. Her heart was still racing. Her skin still remembered every place he had touched her. She closed her eyes, smiling in the dark. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't thinking about tomorrow, or Mike, or what might go wrong. She was only thinking about him. She woke up in a bed that wasn't hers, in a room that smelled of old wood and jasmine, in a house that belonged to Adrian's mother. The guy she'd hit. The guy who had kissed her last night under a tree, in the middle of a maze. For a few seconds she lay still, trying to remember everything from the day before. Her mind returned to one thing only. The fire. His hands. She stared at the ceiling for a moment, and then she smiled and got up. Adrian and his mother were both already at the table when she came downstairs, coffee between them, mid-conversation in the easy way of two people who hadn't needed to warm up to each other in a very long time. They looked up when she appeared in the doorway. "Good morning," his mother said. "We were just talking about you," Adrian said. "We were not," his mother said. Sit down. Claire sat down. A cup appeared in front of her. She glanced at him quickly and caught him smiling at her. His eyes were warm, and for a second she remembered how she'd seen them up close, green and warm, when he kissed her. She shifted in her chair, hoping she wasn't blushing. The conversation resumed around her. So, his mother said, "What is the plan for the day?" "I have a list," Claire said. "And I think I should find somewhere to stay." "Move out," his mother said, in a scandalized tone. "And here I thought you liked my cooking." "I like it very much. I just don't want to be a bother." "No bother at all." She turned to her son, who had watched the exchange in silence. "She has a list. A tourist list. You need to show her the city as we know it." "Of course," he said. "I intend to do exactly that." They took the car to the edge of the French Quarter, parked, and continued on foot slowly, the crutch on the uneven stone, her pace matching his without either of them thinking about it anymore. He knew which streets to take and which to avoid and which doorways led somewhere worth looking at, and he pointed things out the way people pointed out things they loved without performance. "Just here, look at this." They stopped for beignet. Powdered sugar went everywhere, as apparently it always did. "You could have warned me," she said. "I could have," he agreed, and handed her a napkin that made no meaningful difference. The voodoo shop was on a side street, narrow and dim, the kind of place that smelled of incense and had opinions about everything. Adrian walked in without hesitation and she followed, because it seemed wrong to come to New Orleans and not. The woman behind the counter was somewhere between 50 and 80. Claire couldn't narrow it further, with silver rings on every finger and the specific patience of someone who had seen everything and found most of it mildly interesting. Adrian looked around for a moment, then turned to the woman. "I need something," he said, "to make her fall in love with me." Claire elbowed him. He absorbed this without moving. The woman looked at him. Then at Claire. Then back at him, with an expression that shifted into something between amusement and professional curiosity. "Usually," she said, "the request comes the other way around." And looked at Claire meaningfully, the look of a woman indicating that the shelf behind her was available and the offer was open. "No need for that," Adrian said, pleasantly, before Claire could respond. Claire looked at him. He looked back at her with complete composure. The implication sat in the air between them for a moment, entirely visible, and he did nothing to clarify it. "She is modest," he said, to the woman. The woman reached under the counter and produced a small dark bottle with a cork stopper. 3 drops, she said. "In whatever she eats." After that, a gesture that suggested irreversibility, "She is finished. Completely gone for you. No coming back." "How long does it last?" Adrian asked. "Forever," the woman said, with complete confidence. He turned to Claire with an expression of pure innocence. "You don't believe in this," he said. "Of course not," she said. "I'm a nurse." "Then you don't mind if I buy it?" "I could cook tonight." "Maybe we let your mother handle that," she said, after a pause. He laughed genuinely, the full version. "The look on your face." She gave him a look to add to his collection. He turned back to the counter. "I'll take it. And add something for fast healing." The woman nodded, reached for something on the shelf behind her, and wrapped it all in paper together. He paid. Put the small package in his pocket. "What was all that?" she asked, outside. "New Orleans," he said simply. She decided, not for the first time, that being with a lawyer was a specific kind of experience. Claire already felt lost. They turned so many times she'd completely lost her bearings. But he seemed to know exactly where he was taking her, so she kept following. At the corner of a narrow street opening onto a larger one, there was an artist with an easel, a few finished portraits displayed along the wall beside him. Adrian stopped to look, then turned to the man and gave him a precise, unhurried set of instructions. Them too. In a red car. Him with his foot on the dashboard. In the back, a life-size Yoda. The artist did not flinch at the mention of Yoda. Adrian described the cast, and the inscription on it, "I lawyers," which the artist noted with a single raised eyebrow. He described her expression, specifying with unnecessary precision the particular one she wore when she was trying not to laugh at something he said. 20 minutes later he handed it over. It was exactly as described, the cast with its declaration clearly legible, the Yoda serene in the back seat, her expression caught mid-something between amusement and exasperation. The space between them rendered in quick confident lines that had caught something she couldn't have named but recognized immediately. She looked at it for a long moment. They looked good together. She hadn't expected that to be the first thought. Well, Adrian said. It's good, she said, which was true and less than what she meant. He paid without negotiating, and they walked on. It turned out the journey through the maze of streets had a final destination. A restaurant on a street she'd never seen mentioned in her research, at Mickey S., written on a small sign dangling above the entry. Inside it was warm and loud and smelled of something that made her immediately hungry despite the beignet. They were shown to a table without being asked, and 10 minutes later the owner came out of the kitchen. Large, somewhere in his 70s, the rolling walk of someone who had been on his feet for 50 years and was at peace with this. He saw Adrian and his face did several things at once. Little Adrian, he said, and grabbed him by both shoulders. Not so little anymore, Adrian said, and looked at Claire. The owner looked at Claire a quick, warm assessment, then back at Adrian, then at Claire again, and something in his expression shifted. Everything tonight, he said, is on the house. You don't have to. On the house. The finality of a man who had cooked for this boy when he was 8 and was not going to be argued with. He turned to Claire with his hand on his chest. He searched for the word, big now. And strong. Very strong. A serious nod. Also very intelligent. Top of his class. I believe you, Claire said, already laughing. Good. He looked between them once more, decided he had said exactly enough, and excused himself back to the kitchen with the dignity of a man who understood timing. Adrian picked up the menu. Top of his class, she said. Don't, he said. I'm just noting. She smiled into her menu. The food, when it came, was extraordinary not for the body only, but for something else, something harder to name. She could not remember a single day in recent years when she had felt more alive than she did right now, with him, in this small warm restaurant in New Orleans. The owner came back out when they were leaving, grabbed Adrian by both shoulders again, and then turned to Claire and hugged her to the full version, both arms, the hug of a man who had decided she was part of this. She didn't expected and found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she didn't mind at all. They continued through the city after that, unhurried, the afternoon doing what afternoons did in New Orleans, warm and slow and full of things worth stopping for. On the next corner, before turning right, they found a musician with a trumpet and a small girl with a violin. The music was delightful. After they stopped for a while to listen, he held out his hand. Could I have this dance, he said. You have one good leg, she said. Between us we have 3 working ones, he said. We're fine. It was not, technically, dancing, more a slow turning in place, her hand in his arm around her, the crutch managing as best it could. Slightly awkward, entirely unhurried. Both musicians played and watched them. The small girl smiled with her chin glued to the violin. She stopped thinking about the logistics of it somewhere around 2 minutes in. They stayed for 2 songs. The drive back from the French Quarter was 10 minutes through streets she was starting to recognize, the Garden District coming into view with its old trees and iron gates. Her phone buzzed from her purse on the back seat. Then again. Want me to reach back and grab it? He asked. No. Whoever it is can wait until we get home. She bit her lip after that. Why had she said home? So she added, I mean where you live. You're home. It's okay, he said, with a smile already on his face. When she parked and picked the phone up from her purse, she saw it was Mike. 11 missed calls. She put his number straight to voicemail somewhere around the 2nd day of the trip, the way you dealt with things you weren't ready to deal with. Should probably just block it, she thought, and got out of the car. She put the phone back in her bag. Everything okay? Adrian said. Fine, she said. Something I need to do later. He looked at her for a moment with the specific attention he gave things he didn't press, and walked on to the front door. His mother had apparently already decided what was for dinner. Adrian had other ideas. Claire stood in the kitchen doorway and watched them negotiate, his mother gesturing at the ingredients she'd already pulled from the fridge, him pointing at the pantry with the confidence of a man who had a plan and wasn't going to drop it. It lasted about 2 minutes before they landed on a compromise that seemed to suit both of them, though neither acknowledged it as one. Claire went to wash her hands and picked up a cutting board without being asked. They both looked at her. I can do the vegetables, she said. So they all cooked. His mother claimed the far end of the counter for a chocolate something that smelled like paradise. Adrian took the stove. Claire moved between them, chopping and passing things and occasionally receiving instructions from both sides at once, which she resolved by using her own judgment and telling neither of them. How spicy do you want the sauce? Adrian asked. She looked up from the onions. Medium. He raised an eyebrow. In New Orleans, medium is considerably more than medium in the rest of the country. Are you sure? Medium, she repeated. The shrimp on the way here was medium. You ate half my fries. Still medium, she said. Fine, he said, smiling, and added something to the pan that she chose not to ask about. A few minutes later he held out a spoon. Try this. She leaned across and tasted it. Warm, rich, a slow heat that arrived gently, nothing like the shrimp. She looked up at him. Wow, she said. This is really, really good. He turned back to the stove without comment, but the smile on his face said everything. He was genuinely delighted by her reaction. His mother, from the far end of the counter, said nothing. Later, he set up the pasta machine, a hand-cranked thing his mother had owned since before he was born, and fed the dough through it with the ease of someone who'd done it often. You try, he said, and stepped aside. The first sheet came out uneven, buckling before she could catch it. He came around behind her without saying anything, one hand guiding the sheet as it emerged, the other briefly over hers on the handle to show her the rhythm. Slower, he said, close to her ear. Even pressure. She focused very intently on the pasta. His mother announced she needed something from the other room and left with the unhurried calm of someone who needed nothing of the sort. They ate at the long kitchen table, candles lit, his mother's chocolate dessert in the middle of the table. Somewhere between the pasta and the dessert, his mother produced a story about Adrian at 12 deploying it with the satisfaction of a woman who had been saving it for exactly the right moment. He tried to interrupt 3 times. She talked straight through all 3 attempts. Claire laughed until her side hurt, and Adrian looked at her across the table with an expression she was going to need time to process later. His mother set her napkin down and announced she was going to bed. It's 9:30, Adrian said. I'm old, she said, in the tone of someone using this argument for the first time and finding it very effective. She kissed him on the cheek, squeezed Claire's hand, and went upstairs. The terrace off the main sitting room faced the garden, and Adrian led her there after dinner. The jasmine was intoxicating, and the terrace was bathed in the soft light of a few lamps placed in the garden below, their glow reaching up through the leaves. They stood at the railing as the last of the light went out of the sky, both leaning on their elbows, the garden going dark by degrees. She was aware of him beside her. She was, at this point, always aware of him beside her. He turned his head. She turned hers. The kiss was unhurried. His hand came up to her face the way it always did, and she leaned into it and for a second time seemed to stop. There was only him and her and the smell of jasmine, his lips, and the touch of his hand on her face. He pulled back after a while. Stayed close. You should go to bed, he said, in the low voice he'd used on the terrace at the Magnolia Inn. She looked at him. Claire. He held her gaze, and she could see clearly what it was costing him. Go to bed. Or I can't promise what happens next. She looked at him for one more second. Then she went inside. She lay in the dark and listened to the voicemails. Message 1. Where are you? The hospital said you took 2 weeks off. Call me. Message 2. You're with him, aren't you? The guy from the hospital. I'm not stupid, Claire. Message 3. His voice had changed, flatter, quieter, which was somehow worse. I have the security footage from the reservoir. The camera caught what happened. I know you were there. Message 4. Call me. Or I send this to the police. And to the nursing board. She sat up in the dark for a moment, phone in her hand, the garden quiet below the window. Then she called him back. He picked up on the second ring. Finally, he said. What do you want, Mike? I want you to come back. We need to talk. Are you threatening me? She said, in a tone she realized sounded annoyed, which she was. She just didn't want him to know it. A long pause. I want to give us another chance. Another pause. I don't want you near that lawyer. I know his name, by the way. Thanks to your colleague Maria. Then he said the next words faster, like he wanted to throw them out before he could stop himself. If you don't come back, I'll send the file to the hospital. She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the dark window. At the garden below. I'll be back in 2 days, she said. Silence on the other end. Then, 2 days. 2 days, she said, and hung up. She put the phone on the nightstand and looked at the ceiling. On the other hand, she thought if the hospital received the file, she'd probably be fired. Possibly arrested. That was something she couldn't afford. Then she made a decision. Even if she was leaving tomorrow, Mike was not going to ruin this. Whatever this was, whatever it was becoming, he didn't get to touch it. She pulled a robe over the t-shirt and shorts she'd put on after her shower, opened the door, and felt entirely like a teenager about it. Her feet carried her across the garden toward the pool house. Toward him. She didn't know what the next 2 days would bring. But she knew what was now. And she knew what she wanted. The pool house was quiet. Adrian had left the small lamp by the door on and had been sitting on the edge of the bed, phone in hand. He kept opening the messaging app, staring at her name, then closing it again. He wanted to text her. He wanted to tell her that he desired her, that he hadn't felt this happy, this alive, in longer than he could remember. But he didn't want to rush her. He didn't want to push. So he just sat there, thumb hovering over the screen, thinking. He heard the soft knock before he made up his mind. He got up, managed the crutch to the door, and opened it. She was standing in the garden, in a robe, and she looked at him and he looked at her, and neither of them said anything. He stepped back from the door. She came in, closed the distance, and kissed him. He kissed her back, slow at first, then deeper, the kind of kiss that had been building for days and had finally been allowed to arrive. He pulled her closer, one arm around her waist, and she leaned into him completely. He broke the kiss just enough to rest his forehead against hers. Are you sure? He asked, voice low. She looked up at him, eyes steady. I haven't been this sure of anything in a very long time. He smiled and kissed her again. His hand reached back and pushed the door shut without looking. They moved together toward the bed, slow and certain. His hands found the tie of her robe. Hers worked the buttons of his shirt. There was a brief, awkward moment when he tried to lift her and remembered the cast, but she simply smiled against his mouth and helped him lower them both onto the bed. When they were finally skin to skin, he exhaled like something heavy had finally left his chest. She felt it too, the release, the rightness of it. What followed was warm, passionate, and unhurried. He took his time with her lips on her neck, her collarbone, her breasts, drawing soft sounds from her that he seemed to collect and remember. When he finally moved inside her, she gasped his name, fingers digging into his shoulders. They moved together with a kind of desperate tenderness, like they both understood this night was important. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, her head on his chest, his arm wrapped around her. The lamp by the door was still on. Neither of them moved to turn it off. I have to leave tomorrow, she whispered. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. Why? She told him. He listened the way he listened in court, without interrupting, without reacting visibly, taking everything in and letting it settle before he decided what to do with it. Then he held her tighter. I'll handle it, he said. Adrian. Claire. His voice was quiet. Go home. Be there. Don't do anything because of the threat, nothing. I mean that. He pressed his lips to her hair. I'll call you when it's resolved. You can't just. He accessed a private security camera without authorization, he said. He used the footage to coerce someone. That's 2 separate things I can work with before lunch. A pause. Go. I'll take care of it. She was quiet for a moment. Then, okay. He held her, and the garden stayed quiet, and somewhere beyond the wall the city hummed the way it always did, and they fell asleep like that, her against his chest, his arm around her, the lamp still on. His mother was already at the kitchen table when they came in together in the morning. She looked up. Took in the situation in approximately 1 second. Said nothing, but the smile on her face was the kind that didn't require words and wasn't trying to hide itself. Coffee's ready, she said. Claire poured 2 cups. Brought one to Adrian. Sat down. I have to head back today, she said. Something came up. His mother looked at Adrian. He picked up his coffee. I hope you'll come back, his mother said, to Claire. Yes, Claire said, without thinking too much about it. She went upstairs to pack. It didn't take long. She'd been living out of one bag for 2 weeks and had gotten good at it. When she came back down, the kitchen was warm and unhurried and his mother was standing at the counter like she had nowhere to be. She hugged Claire at the door properly, both arms, the full version, and held on for a moment. You're good for him, she said, quietly. You should know that. Claire didn't have an answer for that, so she just held on. Adrian walked her to the car. The morning was already warm, the jasmine doing what it always did, the street quiet and dappled under the old trees. He stood at the door while she put her bag in the back, and when she turned around he pulled her in and kissed her in the way he'd been kissing her, without rush, without announcement, like it was just something they did now. Remember what I told you, he said, when he pulled back. Don't do anything. Let me handle it. Okay, she said. I mean it. I know. He looked at her for a moment. Then he stepped back, and she got in, and he stood on the pavement as she pulled out, and she watched him in the rearview mirror until the street curved and he was gone. She drove for a block in silence. Then she looked at Yoda, in the back seat, watching her with his usual composure. Miss him already, I do, she said, in the voice. Yoda said nothing. Very wise, she told him. Very wise. She turned onto the highway, and pointed the car north, and thought that this was the most beautifully sad moment she had ever had in her life, full in a way that sad things usually weren't, like something had been added rather than taken away. She drove on. He called his investigator at 8:15, while the coffee was still hot. Marcus had worked with him for 4 years, was extremely good at his job, and had long since stopped asking why Adrian needed things done quickly. Adrian gave him the name, the approximate employer, and the basic shape of the situation. Marcus said he'd have something by evening. His mother was in the garden when he went to find her tending to some flowers, pulling weeds and climbers, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and blue rubber gloves. She looked up when she heard him on the steps, and her expression shifted. What happened, she said. He told her. The short version, the footage, the threat, what it meant for Claire. His mother listened in the still, focused way she'd always listened to things that mattered. When he finished, she looked at the flowers for a moment. What are you going to do, she said. Take care of it, he said. Good, she said, and turned back to the flowers. That was that. He spent the morning on the terrace with his laptop, working through what he could while waiting for Marcus, a brief that needed one more read, a motion that needed a small adjustment. Useful work. The kind that kept his hands occupied while his brain ran a separate process he hadn't authorized, involving a woman currently driving north on the I-59. He refreshed his email at approximately 5-minute intervals. This was not something he would have admitted to anyone. Marcus delivered at 6:30. Michael Brent. 31. IT supervisor at CivServe Solutions, a contractor providing infrastructure maintenance for the city of Boston, which was an elegant access point. Not hacked. Borrowed, through a contact in the city's IT department. The name in the report was John Donovan. But Marcus, who had been doing this long enough to know that where there was one thing there were usually others, had also pulled 6 months of financial records. 3 investments, made in the months before public announcements. A residential development company, awarded a city contract 6 weeks after Mike bought $2,000 of stock. A utilities subcontractor, similar pattern. A smaller one, a demolition firm, same fingerprints, smaller scale. The amounts were not large. The pattern was extremely clear. Adrian read it twice, made a list of names, and then set the report aside to call Claire. She picked up on the second ring, and something in him settled slightly at the sound of her voice. Where are you staying? He asked. A pause. I found a place. Familiar one, actually. The Magnolia Inn. Eleanor was very happy to see me, she said. He smiled. He found, sitting in the quiet of the pool house with the lamp on in the garden, that he liked this her back at the inn, the specific continuity of it. Are you okay? He said. Getting there. Any news? Tomorrow, he said. I have everything I need. I'll start making calls in the morning. A pause. Adrian. Thank you. For all of it. I know you didn't have to. He looked at the ceiling. Nobody messes with my lady, he said, then lower, I mean it. She laughed. But it was slightly forced, and he could tell she was trying to be upbeat for him while already contemplating her career in ruins because of Mike. I know you do, she said. He shifted, legs stretched out, the cast catching the lamplight. Claire. Yeah. I miss you, he said. Simply, without construction, the way he said things to her from the beginning when he decided to say them at all. A pause. Then, I miss you too. They talked for another hour after that about nothing specific, about the garden and Eleanor's pastry, and when they hung up the pool house was quiet. He lay in the dark for a while before he slept, thinking through the next steps. The next morning he started with John Donovan. Donovan picked up on the second ring, with the alert wariness of someone who didn't recognize the number but had been expecting a call from someone. Mr. Donovan, Adrian said. My name is Adrian Blackwood. I'm a lawyer in Boston. Do you have a few minutes? What's this about? I'll get to that. First, are you friends with Michael Brent? A pause. We know each other. Good friends? We've had a few drinks. What is this? I want to ask you something directly, Adrian said, in the level tone he used when he wanted someone to understand they were in a conversation that was going somewhere specific and wouldn't benefit from detours. Did you know that Michael intends to use a security camera file, a file that came from the city's network, through your access for personal coercion purposes? Silence. Because I want to make sure you understand what that means for you specifically, Adrian continued. Unauthorized access to a government system is a federal offense. Facilitating coercion with data obtained through that access is a second. Distribution of surveillance footage without authorization depending on how it's used is a third. He paused to let this arrange itself. I'm not going to list all of them, but I want you to have the general picture. When Donovan spoke again, his voice had changed. I didn't know what he was going to do with it. He said it was personal. He said he just needed to see something. I believe you, Adrian said. Which is why I'm calling you and not your supervisor. Another pause. Nothing happens to you. Nothing happens to anyone, as long as Michael doesn't do anything with that file. That's the outcome I'm working toward. But what I need from you, in exchange for that outcome, is simple. What? This friendship ends. Definitively. No more favors, no more access, no more drinks. Whatever he asks you for, the answer is no, and you don't explain why. Adrian kept his voice even, unhurried. Is that something you can commit to? A long silence. Then, yes. Thank you, Adrian said, and hung up. The second call, that afternoon, was to the other name in Marcus's report, the one who passed the investment information. That conversation was shorter and less pleasant and ended the same way. After that, he sat on the terrace for a while in the afternoon light, going through the rest of what Marcus had found. The investments were the piece he liked best. 3 instances, clear pattern, documented. Small enough that Mike had probably thought they were beneath notice. Large enough to be meaningful if someone decided to look. He called Mike at 11 the next morning. Mike answered fast, which meant he'd been waiting. My name is Adrian Blackwood, Adrian said. I think you know who I am. I know who you are, Mike said. Good. Then I'll be brief. You have 30 minutes from when I hang up to send me a text. One of 2 options. He kept his voice even, pleasant, the voice he used when he wanted the other person to understand the conversation was already over. Option 1, the easy way. You delete the footage, every copy, and you don't contact Claire again. The matter is closed. I never think about your investment history. You go on with your life. And option 2? I send what I have on your CivServe trading activity to the DAS office and the SEC. And I send the camera access request to your supervisor at the city contract. And we see what happens next. A pause. I want to be clear that option 2 doesn't help you at all. I'm only including it because I find it useful to name things. A long silence. 30 minutes, Adrian said. The text can just say easy or complicated. I'll understand. He hung up. He set his phone on the table and looked at the garden. 18 minutes later his phone buzzed. Easy. He picked up the phone, typed good, and put it back down. Then he called Claire. She was somewhere in Tennessee when her phone rang. She knew before she picked it up. Not evening, a random hour, a different quality to the buzz. She pulled off the road and sat with the phone in her hand for 1 second, feeling, quietly, like she might be sick. Then she answered. Hey, she said. It's handled, Adrian said. She closed her eyes. For real? For real. Mike want to contact you again. Any of it, the footage, the threat, all of it. It's done. She sat there for a moment and breathed. How? Let us call it a productive 2 days, he said. You don't need the details right now. What you need to know is that it's over. She pressed her free hand to her face. The relief was physical, the specific kind that arrived in the chest, the particular loosening of something that had been held tight for a while. Thank you, she said, when she could. You're welcome. She looked at Yoda in the back seat. He looked back at her with his usual composure. Happy I am, Mr. Yoda, she said. What? Adrian said. Nothing. I'll call you later. I need to find somewhere to stop. She found it 40 minutes later, pulling into the familiar parking lot with the ice machine and the hot dog machine and the front office where a man had watched a kitchen drama on his phone and not asked questions. The same motel. She stood in the lot for a moment looking at the 2 rooms where they stayed, side by side, the door he left ajar and felt, unexpectedly, fond. She got a room and called him from the terrace around the back, in the chair where they played Never Have I Ever with plastic cups and bourbon and a lamp that buzzed overhead. I'm on the terrace, she said, when he picked up. A pause. Our terrace? The one and only. Good, he said. I like that. She leaned back and looked at the parking lot and the night sky above it, which was more stars than she was used to, and told him about the drive, and he told her about the afternoon, and at some point he said, I'm coming to Boston tomorrow. She sat up slightly. You don't have to do that. I'm on my way back, I'll cancel the rest of the leave, go back to work. Claire. I'm serious, you should rest your leg, you don't need to. My mother, he said, is the one sending me. A pause. Then, slightly away from the phone, Mom. Footsteps and the sound of the crutch on stone. Do you prefer me here sulking or in Boston happy? His mother's voice, without any hesitation whatsoever, Boston happy. More footsteps and crutch, him returning to wherever he'd been sitting. See, he said. She was laughing. She hadn't planned to, but there it was. Okay, she said. I can't wait for us to go to Cluck Norris, he said, and the ease of it, the specific casual certainty of us, Cluck Norris, a plan did something to her chest that she chose not to examine too closely at 11 at night in a parking lot in Tennessee. Yes, she said. To what? Yes to everything. I'll pick you up from the airport. Yes, I'm staying on vacation. Yes, Cluck Norris. He laughed. She laughed. They stayed on the phone until the lamp above the terrace buzzed once and gave out. She got back to Boston the next afternoon. The apartment felt, when she opened the door, exactly like it had when she left, which was to say slightly smaller than she remembered, and quieter than she expected, and missing something she hadn't known was missing before. She did some shopping. Tidied up, which it needed. Made the apartment presentable in the specific way you made things presentable when someone was coming who hadn't been before and whose opinion you cared about but were pretending not to. She installed Yoda in the living room. He looked good there. He looked, frankly, like he'd always lived there, which she chose not to overthink. The flight landed at 4. The arrivals hall at Logan Airport was loud and chaotic, but Claire spotted him immediately. Adrian walked out with his carry-on bag over one shoulder and the crutch under the other arm, moving with that familiar, determined stride. She spotted him from across the arrivals hall, the crutch, the dark jacket, the particular way he moved through a crowd as though the crowd had made space before he needed to ask. He saw her at the same moment and smiled with his eyes and his whole face. When he saw her waiting near the exit, his whole face changed. He smiled. She didn't wait for him to reach her. She walked straight into his arms. He dropped the bag, wrapped one arm around her, and pulled her close. They stood like that for a long moment, surrounded by rushing travelers, but it felt like the rest of the world had gone quiet. "I missed you," he murmured into her hair. "I missed you more." He kissed her right there, slow, deep, and full of everything they hadn't been able to say over the phone. When they finally pulled apart, both a little breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Let us go home." Cluck Norris was exactly as it had always been, the smell, the noise, the counter with the menu board that hadn't changed since presumably the beginning. They ordered and ate at a table by the window. "This is good," he said, around the second piece. "Too good," she said. "Better when it's hot." "Don't remind me. You were very demanding about the temperature of your delivery chicken." "To be honest," he said, "I just needed a reason to see you." He laughed. She smiled back at him and thought that apart from the restaurant in New Orleans, this was the second time she felt genuinely good eating somewhere, with someone. So it wasn't the place. It was the person. The drive back to his apartment was filled with easy conversation and stolen glances. When they stepped inside, the familiar smell of his space, clean, warm, with that faint trace of his cologne, hit her all at once. She closed the door behind them. Adrian turned to her, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Then he crossed the distance and kissed her again, slower this time, more intentional. His hand slid under her shirt, warm against her skin. She tugged at his, and they moved toward the bedroom without breaking the kiss. Clothes came off slowly, piece by piece. When they were finally skin to skin, he lowered her onto the bed with care, then settled beside her. His mouth moved over her neck, her collarbone, her breasts, drawing soft sighs from her. She ran her hands over his back, feeling the strength there, the familiar warmth. When he finally moved inside her, it felt like coming home. They made love slowly, tenderly, taking their time. Every touch, every kiss, every shared breath carried the weight of the month they spent apart. There was no rush. Only need, affection, and the deep certainty that had grown between them. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the middle of his big bed. Claire rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare back. His apartment was quieter than she remembered, or maybe she remembered it differently now, having been in it twice before under entirely different circumstances. He poured wine. They sat on the couch and talked for a while. Then they didn't talk. She thought that she'd driven a very long way to get here. Worth every second. 6 months later, he asked her to Cluck Norris. This was not, in itself, unusual. They went to Cluck Norris the way other people went to restaurants they agreed on regularly, without much discussion, with the particular ease of two people who had stopped needing to negotiate the small things. He text, she say yes, they go. Simple. But this time he said, "I made a reservation." Claire had looked at the text for a moment. Cluck Norris did not take reservations. Cluck Norris had a laminated menu and a counter and paper bags and the specific democratic chaos of a place that had decided long ago that reservations were not part of the experience. She went anyway. He was already there when she arrived at a table by the window, the one they always took, except that this time there was a candle on it. A small candle, slightly incongruous next to the paper napkin dispenser and the hot sauce, but there nonetheless. She sat down across from him. "There's a candle," she said. "There is," he agreed. "Cluck Norris doesn't have candles?" "They do now." I asked. She looked at him. She knew him well enough by now. In the past few months his apartment had, gradually and without any formal announcement, become their apartment. Her books on the shelf between his law books. Yoda in the living room, presiding over everything with his usual composure. But this time, she couldn't read his expression. "Adrian," she said. "I love you," he said. Then he continued, without taking his eyes off hers. "I know the candle is a lot," he said. "But I wanted to say it somewhere that meant something." And this, he gestured, briefly, at the paper napkin dispenser, the menu board, the general cheerful noise of the place, means something. She thought about the first time she'd come here, carrying cold chicken to a hospital room. She thought about 800 miles of American highway. About never have I ever on a plastic terrace. About a maze in New Orleans, and a street musician, and a portrait in a red car, and a motel terrace where a lamp had buzzed out exactly at the right moment. She thought about Yoda. Obviously. "I love you too," she said. He nodded, like this confirmed something he'd been fairly sure of but was glad to have confirmed. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and put a small box on the table, next to the candle and the hot sauce. "And I'd like you to be my wife," he said. "Officially. With documentation." She looked at the box. Then at him. "Not just not wife," he said. "Actual wife," she said. "Legal. Binding. No ambiguity." She opened the box. "Yes," she said. "Yeah?" "Yes," she said again, more clearly, because he was going to ask a third time if she didn't tea, and they both knew it. He smiled and slid the ring onto her finger across a table at Cluck Norris, and the candle flickered. Their usual order arrived a few minutes later, and the waitress set it down and said, "Congratulations. We have a surprise for you." She came back with a small cake, on which someone had made a valiant effort to write in whipped cream, "Built to last." They thanked her. Claire looked at the cake, then at him. "What is this?" "I thought Cluck Norris didn't do desserts." "It doesn't," he said. "But I think the candle request gave us away." He smiled. The cake was very, very good. In a living room of dark colors across the city, Yoda sat undisturbed in his corner. "Saw this coming," he did not say. Very wise, Claire would have told him if she'd been there. She wasn't there. She was at Cluck Norris, being kissed by her fiancé, and the chicken was hot, and everything was exactly as it should be.